Chapter 1464. My name is the Chicken Overlord. I believe that everyone here already knows me and has a deep understanding of me, so I won't introduce myself any further. But I was no different from the previous seniors who had introduced themselves. This was because I was also panicking right now. No, it was more accurate to say that I was even more panicked than them. That evil star was actually the Dark Ruler. Grandpa heavens, this world was far too terrifying. It simply changed at a whim. But before I could fully accept this and digest it, even more terrifying events began to occur, one after another. First was a woman. Don't ask me how I know this, but her hands were incomparably delicate. Even if she were to touch your head, you would know. Moreover, that terrifying aura, that feeling of limitless impending death, was like a burning hot iron rod that branded itself into my mind, impossible to erase. I didn't know who she was, but this woman was absolutely the most terrifying female life form I had ever encountered in my life. Not one of them. Cough, cough. As my cultivation increased, my horizons gradually broadened, causing me to have a higher level of appreciation for beauty. But this woman, I didn't dare to think about it. I didn't dare to think about it at all. Originally, I thought that she was the most terrifying climax of this terrifying transformation. But the facts prove that I was still too young. As long as I followed beside that evil star, all sorts of strange and impossible things would happen. Thus I saw that door. Although my divine kingdom had been stolen from me, I had still possessed it for a period of time. Fake or fate could also be called him. This involved the transformation of life's natural order. In truth, because I didn't study it completely, I wasn't too clear on specifics. But it gave me an extremely sharp perception. Thus, I was able to clearly see the essence of that door. If that woman just now gave me the feeling of mountains and rivers being torn to shreds, then the aura from that door was the feeling of the sun and moon collapsing and all things being destroyed. In short, at that time, if I wasn't standing on Qin Yu's shoulder and worried that he might retaliate against me, I would have pissed myself on the spot. Just what did that evil star want to do? I actually encountered such a terrifying event in succession. But this wasn't the end, because that evil star actually walked through that open door. Was he insane? I wanted to run away, but my legs were already weak. My wings, which had once soared tens of thousands of li high in the sky, were now so weak that I couldn't exert even the slightest bit of strength. She could only desperately grab onto his shoulder and allow herself to be brought in. Then, she was enveloped by an aura and brought to an unknown place. As for my sensitive senses, I had already mentioned it before. Thus, the moment I came into contact with the aura surrounding my body, I fainted from fright. I admit that I must be in an extremely sorry state right now, but from how I see it, being able to faint now is an incomparably fortunate thing. At the very least, I no longer had to endure those unstoppable and terrifying attacks. As for what the future would be like, who knew? In any case, I was powerless against it. True Divine Bayou glanced at the chicken overlord that had fainted on Qin Yu's shoulder. Even though it was in a state of unconsciousness, it still didn't forget to hold onto his shoulder, as if it was afraid that it would be left behind. His lips twitched as he said, "Your Excellency, this pet of yours is quite interesting." Qin Yu's expression was calm. He lightly said, "Because of certain reasons, this fellow's perception is quite sharp. He should have been frightened." What nonsense! He was definitely frightened. This was because, let alone the chicken overlord, even though Qin Yu was calm on the outside, his heart was racing with panic. There was no other reason than that the aura was too strong. It was the strength that had pulled them all the way to the desolate region. Qin Yu naturally didn't know that the Patriarch had personally fought with the Western Wasteland Imperial Palace Master to temporarily seal off the channel. But there must have been a problem with the channel that connected the Western Wasteland to the Broken World. If so, then there must have been powerhouses that arrived one after another. It was impossible for Qin Yu to so easily destroy the countless years of painstaking effort that the Western Wasteland had put in. This wasn't something that was difficult to guess. With the strength of the Western Wasteland arriving to guide them, it was reasonable to prevent any accidents from occurring, but The person who did this was far too ridiculously strong. Half-sovereign. He was absolutely a half-sovereign. Qin Yu already knew that there was such a peerless powerhouse in the Western Wasteland, but he never imagined that he would come into contact with him so soon. But thinking about it calmly, it was also reasonable that there was a half-sovereign level powerhouse at the end of the channel. So, there really wasn't a need to panic. But the emotions in one's heart couldn't be controlled just because one thought about it clearly. For example, at this moment, Qin Yu still couldn't suppress the panic in his heart. It was just that his acting was better, and he didn't show it on the surface. Under the black robe, Qin Yu's eyes flickered, and he said, "I wonder which lord has troubled me to welcome us into the Western Wasteland today?" Sage-to-be Bai Su glanced at him and revealed a look of respect. "If I'm not wrong, it should be Your Excellency Sakura." Things like names were worthless in Qin Yu's eyes, even if he was a half-sovereign level powerhouse. What Qin Yu wanted was detailed information about this half-sovereign Sakura, such as his cultivation and personality. This was his instinct. Once he sensed an uneasy and dangerous aura, he would subconsciously think about it and try to find an option that was beneficial to him. "Your Excellency Sakura." Qin Yu didn't hide the curiosity in his voice and looked at True Saint Bai Su. There must be a reason for the Imperial Palace to suddenly summon the ruler of darkness into the desolate region. In addition to his own channels, he could vaguely guess what was going on. It seemed that after preparing for a long time, the Empire was finally going to try to obtain that treasure. If that was really the case, the ruler of darkness would obviously play an extremely important role in what was going to happen next. Thinking about his current strength and the conciliatory intention in the letter, True Saint Bai Su made a decision. The respect on his face didn't diminish, and he said slowly, "Your Excellency Sakura isn't from a sovereign clan. Instead, he rose from the wilderness and reached his current strength in less than 10,000 years. He's the youngest of the 7 half-sovereigns of the Western Wasteland. However, his strength is considered an extremely powerful existence among the half-sovereigns of the Great Wilderness." True Saint Bai Su chose to get close to him. After all, these things weren't a secret. With the ruler of darkness's strength, he would easily find out about it in the future. Now that he had the right time and place, he had the opportunity to use these things to exchange for a favorable impression from the ruler of darkness. Although the ruler of darkness wasn't too important in True Saint Bai Su's eyes, of course, this had nothing to do with his cultivation level. It was because with his status in the Western Wasteland, a ruler was indeed nothing. But the future was constantly changing, and no one knew what would happen in the end. If he occasionally spread some good karma, perhaps there would be some unexpected harvests. After all, in this world, even if one wanted to be a spectator outside of a quagmire, they still needed to stand firm and steady. Otherwise, they wouldn't know when they would be dragged into it by others. And making good karma was clearly the best way to stabilize one's position while maintaining a neutral stance. Qin Yu could roughly guess what True Saint Bai Su was thinking. As he looked at True Saint Bai Su's slow yet earnest and detailed explanation, he couldn't help but have a strange feeling in his heart. He feared that all of this would come to nothing in the end. This True Saint Bai Su was truly pitiful. As long as he met Qin Yu, he would suffer a loss. He really couldn't bear to see this. But even though he couldn't bear to see this, Qin Yu wasn't so kind as to remind him not to waste his efforts here. Moreover, this information was far too important to him. Although knowing the approximate information of a half-step sovereign wouldn't change the situation he would face in the slightest, at least he wouldn't be in the dark anymore. At the very least, he would have a bit more confidence in his heart. The passage was incomparably long. He had already been in it for a long time. Wrapped in the power of a half-step sovereign, it seemed as if he couldn't see the end. This caused Qin Yu's tense heart beneath his black robes to quietly grow a bit more worried about what might happen in the future. Even if he managed to rush in, it wouldn't be easy for him to smoothly return to the vast young world. However, this was a matter for the future. He didn't know what would happen right now, so there was no need to think about the long term. Moreover, no matter how long the passage was, it would eventually come to an end. When a glimmer of light appeared at the end of the passage, True Saint Bai soon nodded and fell silent. Shua. In the next moment, brilliant light sprinkled down, covering Qin Yu within. He couldn't help but narrow his eyes as he looked at the skies above him. Then, his heart shook and he suppressed the sourness in his eyes, revealing a bit of shock that he couldn't hide. This was because in the skies above, 9 suns had appeared together. This scene surpassed his imagination. Even though Qin Yu had a firm will and a deep mind, he still couldn't help but fall into a deep shock. 9 suns. In the desolate region, he could actually see 9 suns at the same time, but the feeling it gave off was warm and incomparably comfortable. There wasn't any horrifying scene of 9 suns displaying their might together and burning down the heavens and earth. Could it be because the desolate region was vast enough that it could withstand the light of 9 suns simultaneously? Qin Yu regained his composure. He took a deep breath and was about to restrain his thoughts. But at this time, his complexion changed and he froze where he was. At this moment, in Qin Yu's world, the 9 suns in the skies suddenly dimmed and then extinguished, turning into pitch black. A pair of eyes appeared in this pitch black darkness. It was like the appearance of these eyes had directly extinguished the 9 suns. Qin Yu's scalp tingled and all the hairs on his body stood up. He felt as if he would explode on the spot. Of course, this was an illusion. He wouldn't be killed because these eyes had locked onto him. It was just that all of his concealment had been stripped away in an instant. It was like his naked heart had been completely cut open for all to see. This clearly wasn't Qin Yu's original intention. But now that his consciousness had been forcefully extracted and isolated from his control of his body, he could sense all of this, but he was powerless to change anything. It seemed like a breath of time had passed, but it also seemed like countless years. At this moment, the concept of time and space had completely disappeared. Qin Yu suddenly regained control of his body. He was like a drowning person who had been rescued. His face was pale, and he was panting for breath. His eyes were filled with endless fear. "Farewell, Lord Sakura." True Saint Baiyu's respectful voice sounded out from the side. He bowed deeply and bowed. At this moment, Qin Yu knew that the owner of those eyes, just now, was at the half-sovereign realm. So this was the strength of a half-sovereign realm expert. Qin Yu had imagined countless possibilities of this level of strength, but only after experiencing it for himself did he realize just how lacking his imagination was. The trembling in his heart told him coldly that the reason why he hadn't died after being locked onto by those eyes was because the other party hadn't sensed anything wrong from his body. In other words, if Qin Yu had exposed himself, then when Sakura's eyes locked onto him, he would have already died. A single gaze could kill a true saint. Qin Yu was slower by more than a beat, but he still suppressed his fear and panic. He bowed to show his respect and reverence. He was incomparably clear in his heart that if he hadn't obtained the Dark Emperor crown, he wouldn't have been able to resist the gaze of a half-sovereign realm expert. Thinking about the enemies in the future, there would be more than one half-sovereign realm expert, and it was very likely that there would be even more powerful existences. Even though Qin Yu was mentally prepared for the strength of the Western wilderness and that clan, he was still filled with difficulty and hesitation. Could he really contend against such a powerful enemy? Chapter 1465. After a long time, True Saint Baiyu stood up and looked in a certain direction with respect in his eyes. Half-sovereigns were the cornerstone of a country. No matter what influence one belonged to, they were treated with the highest respect and reverence. He turned to look at Qin Yu. True Saint Baiyu's eyes revealed a bit of surprise. He felt that his previous decision was correct. Dark Ruler, His Excellency Sakura has left. You can get up. The reason he exclaimed in admiration was very simple. It was because he was able to react so quickly after being probed by a quasi-monarch. Moreover, he was able to react in such a dignified manner. Just this was shocking enough. Qin Yu's body trembled as if he had been standing for a long time. He slowly straightened his body and revealed an incomparably pale face. His lips twitched, and he revealed an extremely forced smile. "I've made true saint by you laugh at me. True saint by you shook his head." He earnestly said, "On the contrary, I admire the dark ruler. There is no ridicule in my words. You do have the qualifications." Qin Yu looked at his expression, and his smile became even more bitter. "Perhaps, but this feeling is really bad. It makes me feel as if my entire life of cultivation has been useless." True Saint Baiyu had a thoughtful expression. He nodded and said, "Indeed." It was clear he had a similar unpleasant experience. Then he comforted Qin Yu, looking at the vast and endless Western Desolate. There are only 7 half-sovereigns. In fact, with your current cultivation, you are an absolute powerhouse in the desolate region and have the qualifications to stand on your own side. There is no need to belittle yourself. After a brief pause and a moment of hesitation, True Saint Baiyu lowered his voice and said, "I can't be sure of the specifics right now, but as long as the Dark Ruler does this well, his future will be bright." Qin Yu took a deep breath and then slowly exhaled. "I hope so." The reason he had suffered such a heavy blow was because of the terrifying strength of a half-sovereign. But, more importantly, it was because of the retaliation and resistance he would face in the future. Although there didn't seem to be any difference between the two to the current Qin Yu, the truth was that there was still a difference, and it was astonishingly large. It was because of this that he felt as if he was carrying a mountain on his back. Even breathing became difficult and sour. True Saint Baiyu smiled. "Let's go." Qin Yu was still alive, which meant he had passed the test. As for the wounds in his heart, they weren't something that could be healed with just a few words. They needed time to slowly heal. Shua, True Sage Baitu, led the two out of the passageway and into the distance. Haoyang. The gears of time slowly rotated until the moment when Qin Yu stepped into the channel and was pulled into the western wilds by the half-sovereign. Somewhere in the pitch-black void of the outer world, the old turtle suddenly frowned and turned to look in the direction of the dark world. The aura that he sensed belonged to Qin Yu suddenly vanished. This wasn't destruction or death, but a formidable strength isolating it. The only thing that could isolate the brand he left behind was the old turtle looked up at the endless darkness above, his eyes cold. Qin Yu was a chess piece that was extremely useful to him. He was a key part of his plan, but now he had entered that world. If someone with ulterior motives were to discover this and make use of it, not only would the entire plan fall short of success, it might even give them an opportunity to take advantage of it. With some hesitation in his eyes, the old turtle suddenly raised his hand and pointed between his eyebrows. "Ha!" It was like a bubble bursting, but in the incomparably quiet nothingness of the outer world, it was still grating to the ears. The old turtle paled, but his expression remained calm. He would rather abandon all of his previous arrangements than take the slightest risk. However, since Qin Yu had been abandoned, he would need to change his plans. After a moment of hesitation, the old turtle stepped forwards. His figure vanished and then reappeared. After several short steps, an incomparably massive world void creature appeared in front of him. The giant tentacle that quietly swam through the endless darkness seemed to sense some terrifying aura at this moment. It waved its massive body and rushed outwards. Its reaction was extremely fast, but to the old turtle, it was meaningless. Shua, his figure vanished from where he stood, as if he had never appeared. Not too far away, the panic-stricken world void creature that wanted to flee suddenly trembled before returning to silence. It retracted its tentacle. Then, like a piece of driftwood in the deep sea, it slowly moved along with some invisible fluctuations. Pa! Qin Yu could clearly hear a light sound emitting from deep within his body. Beneath his black robes, his complexion changed, revealing a dark and gloomy expression. After sensing for a long time, he frowned. His complexion relaxed a great deal, but soon puzzlement appeared in his eyes. The connection between him and the old turtle had been severed with that light sound just now, without any trace remaining. It seemed that the shadow of the abyss had already sensed that Qin Yu had entered the desolate region. Out of some scruples or caution, it had severed some sort of mark in Qin Yu's body on its own initiative. Strictly speaking, this should be a good thing. After all, the shadow of the abyss's intentions were unclear, but there was a high chance that it harbored malicious intent. After it had thoroughly awakened, it was no longer the old turtle, but the intruder that maintained the will of the abyss. Just what did it want to do? If a shadow of the abysses will remain in the vast Yang world, it would likely cause major problems in the future. Qin Yu's thoughts raced, but soon he bitterly smiled. He couldn't even care about himself right now. So how could he care about anything else? He took a deep breath and suppressed his thoughts. He thought about how he could smoothly return to vast Yang world and then think of a way to deal with it. At this moment, true Saint Baiyu said, "Darkness ruler, we are here." Arriving did not mean that they had reached their destination. The western wasteland was vast, much larger than the vast Yang realm. Even for a true sage, it would be extremely difficult for him to traverse the entire West Wilderness territory alone. That was why many cities in the Western Baron had built many teleportation gates. Only through this method could they rule over this huge empire. The teleportation gates were divided into different levels, and cities of different sizes had their own matching mechanisms. Of course, Qin Yu couldn't predict the future. Thus, this information was inadvertently revealed in a casual conversation between true Saint Baiyu, who had the intention of befriending him. He believed that Qin Yu could understand his meaning, and this was indeed the case. But, deep in Qin Yu's heart, he could only apologize. As an imposter, there was no telling when he would get into trouble. True Sage Baiyu's attempt to befriend him was not the right choice. Of course, Qin Yu wouldn't remind him. After all, everyone in this world had to pay for their own choices. Even if something happened and true Saint Baiyu was implicated, he could only blame his bad luck. Cough cough, who told him to deliver himself to Qin Yu on his own initiative. Qin Yu had no intention of harming him. Perhaps it was to prevent any accidents from occurring in the channel, but a large area around it did not allow the construction of teleportation gates. Qin Yu followed true Saint Baiyu for a long time before they arrived at the city in front of them. Although the scale of this city was astonishing in Qin Yu's eyes, in true Saint Baiyu's words, it was only a small fifth-tier city. Its only use was to provide a teleportation gate that led to other large cities. He hadn't fully explained this before. Different levels of teleportation gates had great differences in usage. It wasn't as if one could enter a teleportation gate and smoothly reach anywhere they wanted. Perhaps it was to prevent accidents or to deal with sudden problems. But unless there were special circumstances, low-level teleportation gates could only send one to a higher-level city, and so on and so forth. The small city that true Saint Baiyu spoke of caused Qin Yu's heart to tremble, because in this city, he could feel the aura of a saint. Although it was only a bitter sea half-saint that had yet to transcend, it had to be known that in front of him, a small fifth-tier city that true Saint Baiyu spoke of was actually guarded by a saint. And in vast Yang, a half-saint had the qualifications to establish a sect. Even like the Heavenly Sword sect, they could occupy an independent small world. As expected, the level of strength and the strength of the cultivators in the desolate region were far greater than in vast Yang. In addition, Qin Yu also discovered another matter that shocked him greatly. That was that in this small city, there were a large number of ordinary people living. Of course, they were stronger than ordinary people, and their life aura was also more exuberant. But compared to the power that cultivators controlled, they could only be classified as ordinary people. His divine sense could sense that although these ordinary people lived a difficult life, and most of them were engaged in hard labor, they were still alive and well in a city that had a half-saint. In a vast Yang world, this was an unimaginable matter. Let's go. It's just a small city. There is no need to stop. As true Saint Baiyu finished speaking, he brought Qin Yu directly into the city and landed in front of the tightly guarded transmission gate. Without needing to speak, the powerful pressure that the two of them exuded caused everyone's complexions to change, and they revealed looks of awe. But there wasn't much panic in their expressions. This was likely because this small city was close to the passage to the broken world, and they often encountered high-level characters of the Empire. "Greetings, lords. Please show me your proof of identity." This was the rule for using the transmission gate. True Saint Bayou naturally wouldn't put on airs with these people. He casually took out a token and flashed it. The complexions of the guards outside the transmission gate changed, and they knelt on the ground, their bodies shivering. Qin Yu was startled. He glanced at True Saint Bayou. In the desolate region, a true saint shouldn't possess such a terrifying deterrence. It seemed that this fellow's identity wasn't ordinary. True Saint Bayou wanted to make friends with Qin Yu, so he naturally had to show some things. He might not be able to match Qin Yu in terms of cultivation, but his status was enough to make up for the disparity between them. Thus, sensing the change in Qin Yu's eyes, True Saint Bayou smiled and gestured with his hand. "Dark Ruler, please." He didn't need to say anything, but this silence in itself represented his formidable self-confidence. Chapter 1466. There was no need to elaborate on the transmission process. The only thing that left Qin Yu amazed was its efficiency and smoothness. The entire process was fast and quiet. It didn't give anyone the slightest feeling of discomfort. Even an ordinary person would be able to pass through these transmission gates. From this, it could be seen that the desolate region had amazing attainments in the aspect of transmission gates. It was clear that they had spent a great deal of time and energy in this aspect. This caused Qin Yu to think back to the massive number of ordinary people he saw in that city just now. The doubts in his heart became increasingly heavy. After stepping out a transmission gate, they didn't pause at all. After True Saint Bayou revealed his identity, the two of them turned and entered another transmission gate. When they stepped out again, a powerful aura covered the entire area. Qin Yu's heart chilled and shook. It was clear that this transmission gate had an extremely powerful array formation set up around it. It was enough to leave Qin Yu startled. From this, it could be seen just how terrifying it was. "Who?" True Saint Bayou let out a long breath. He smiled and turned. "Darkness Sovereign, now we can be considered to have truly entered the bustling region of the Western Desolate." Qin Yu slowly nodded. The desolate region truly lives up to its reputation. There was no exaggeration in these words. Even the small 5-line city that Bayou spoke of had a half-step Saint powerhouse guarding it, much less a large city like this. Although there was a powerful array formation covering the transmission gate, Qin Yu could still feel several terrifying auras looming over him. Among them, the most obscure one was like a bird that flew past the surface of the water in the early morning of winter, leaving behind an extremely dim shadow that was almost ignored. Strong, extremely strong. It even gave Qin Yu the same feeling as when he faced the Darkness Sovereign. In other words, this person was at least at the weak sovereign level. If he had some more hidden cards, he would be a true sovereign. As for the Darkness Sovereign, he was someone who had hidden away in the vast Yang world, a legendary character. But now, he had encountered one in a random city. Although Qin Yu already knew just how terrifying the desolate region was, he still couldn't help but feel shocked at this moment. True Saint Bayou swept his eyes over the silent, black-robed figure. He clearly sensed Qin Yu's current mood. He smiled and said, "Although this place isn't a peak city of the Western Desolate, it is still a first-class city. There will naturally be powerhouses guarding it." Although he wanted to win over Qin Yu and establish a relatively good relationship between them, standing from the standpoint of the Western Desolate, he still subconsciously hoped that Qin Yu would feel a bit more awe and dread in his heart. Only then would he be able to see his own position and avoid any rash and impulsive actions in the future. Qin Yu nodded. "Have we arrived?" True Saint Baitu said, "Not yet, but after arriving here, we only need to go through another teleportation to reach the imperial capital." After a pause, he smiled and said, "This big city is called Ocean Viewing. Of course, there is no ocean here, so I've always been puzzled as to why it's called this. However, none of this is important. The important thing is that the lords stationed in Guanhai City are old friends with my family. Since I've revealed my identity, I can't just leave without informing them. That would be too rude." Qin Yu said, "If time permits, I can wait." True Sage Bayou smiled. "I won't take too long. Dark Ruler, please follow me." Indeed, just as Qin Yu guessed, True Sage Baitu had an extraordinary status in the Western Desolate. His family actually had a sizable property in ocean viewing city. Some people said that the two most ancient professions in the world were thieves and prostitutes. Let's not consider whether or not this was true. But right now, there was a strange look on Yu's face. The place he was brought to was a brothel. Under the respectful and earnest guidance of the boss, the group passed through the lively front yard and arrived at a giant lake. Dozens of courtyards of different styles, all exuding a noble and gorgeous aura, were situated on the shore in succession. Among them, weeping willows were nestled. As the breeze blew across the surface of the lake, the gentle and quiet willow branches swayed gently, as if they were countless captivating souls. There was a knock on the courtyard doors. Miss Yun, who had just fallen asleep not too long ago, resisted the weariness in her heart and soreness in her eyes. She wondered where this strange pervert had come from and why he wanted to disturb her peace and quiet in broad daylight. But she still had a sweet smile on her face. She ordered the maids to quickly open the doors and then, with a burst of fragrant wind, welcomed them. She saw the smiling and respectful face of the boss, who was rumored to have transcendent abilities. Then, she saw the two youths behind him who didn't seem to have an imposing aura, but were still dazzling. Miss Yin was startled and groaned inwardly. She feared that the purity she had painstakingly guarded for so many years would be destroyed today. Although she had already expected that this day would come, to think that two people would come at once, this caused Miss Yin to bitterly smile inwardly. She couldn't help but feel a bit of apprehension and fear. But this person was someone that even the boss had to carefully curry favor with. What could a mere weak woman like her do? She could only resign herself to adversity. Yin Qin greets the two young masters. Hot water and tea have been prepared. Please come in and wash away the dust and fatigue from your journey. Her voice was very pleasant to listen to. Most importantly, it didn't have the slightest bit of flattery. Instead, it gave off a sense of calmness and comfort. True Saint Bayou glanced at the boss and revealed a look of satisfaction. He turned around and said, "Darkness cough, you can rest here for a while. I will definitely be back before sunset. If you need anything in the meantime, just let me know." After saying that, he cupped his hands and turned to leave. His gaze swept across Chinyu. Although his expression couldn't be seen under the cover of his black robe, his slightly tense body showed that he didn't expect such a thing to happen. This guy was actually a little nervous. Could he be a virgin? In this world, there were people who loved beauties more than anything else. However, there are also people who only knew how to cultivate and lived like ascetic monks. True Saint Bayou's lips curled up. He felt that at least in some aspects, he was stronger than the darkness True Saint. Then, with a strange sense of superiority, he disappeared on the lakeside path. Miss Yin stood up and secretly heaved a sigh of relief. At the same time, she was a little disappointed. As a member of the party, it was natural for her to be observant. Of course, she could tell that the person who left was the most important person in the party. However, she didn't dare to reveal anything on the surface. Since he was a guest that had to be carefully arranged to leave, he definitely wouldn't be ordinary. "Young master, please." Under the black robe, Chinyu took a deep breath and stepped into the courtyard. Hearing the sound of the courtyard door closing behind him, his nose was filled with a fragrant wind. After taking a breath, his mind started to wander unknowingly. Then some hot air started to run around in his body. Along the way, the maidservant walked in front and Miss Yun followed beside him. Chinyu forcefully suppressed his thoughts and didn't let his gaze fall on the girl beside him. Although True Saint Bayou had the intention to rope him in along the way, he had just entered the desolate region and he had to be careful. However, when he thought about how the first place he came to after entering the desolate region was actually a brothel, deep in his heart, Chinyu couldn't help but have a strange feeling. Of course, it was only a little bit. This was because his heart was in shock and he didn't have the energy to think about it anymore. From the outside, the small courtyard looked extraordinary. After entering, he could feel more clearly what it meant to be ingenious and what it meant to surpass the heavens. As far as the eye could see, there wasn't a single place that wasn't exquisite. Although it wasn't conspicuous, it gave off a comfortable feeling. After entering the room and taking a seat, Qin Yu still wore black robes that covered his entire body. However, the people of this brothel were experienced and knowledgeable, so they had encountered all sorts of strange guests. They had heard that in the early years, there was even a fierce general in the army who was fully armored and fought with a big sister on the bed. After that day, although her entire body was covered in blood from being pierced by the armor, she still obtained extremely rich rewards. This was a story that had been passed down in this brothel for a long time and was envied by many newcomers. After all, the rewards they heard were enough to make their hearts race with excitement. Thus, it didn't matter if one was eccentric or not. On the contrary, the more eccentric a guest was, the more popular they would be in this brothel. After all, only a powerhouse or someone with the ability could maintain their own uniqueness. This could probably be explained, as the saying went, risks and benefits coexisted. This strange black-robed guest in front of him, from the way he had appeared, he was clearly someone with great strength. As her thoughts raced, Miss Yun ordered a maid to bring hot water. After Qin Yu waved his hand and sent her away, she continued to smile and serve tea. You're here to have some fun today, so it's better to relax a little. This tea is excellent, and we only brew it for distinguished guests. You should drink it while it's hot, so as not to waste it. As Miss Yun spoke, she looked at the strange black-robed guest in front of her. She didn't know if it was an illusion or not, but she felt that from the moment they met until now, a great deal of his attention had been focused on her, even though his expression was extremely restrained. Miss Yun had always been confident in her own intuition, and past events had proven that she had the qualifications to be confident. Could it be that this strange black-robed guest had taken a liking to her? What if he wanted to do? What should she do? Should she refuse? Looking at the boss's attitude just now, this person likely had an amazing background. If she were to provoke him, she would surely suffer. But if she complied with him, she wouldn't have the qualifications to live in this lakeside courtyard anymore. She would lose her current status and support. As Miss Yin thought about it, she discovered that she could only resign herself to adversity. As for what would happen in the end, she could only hope that this person wouldn't be too heartless and give her some sort of explanation. As she thought of this, there was a bit more bitterness and panic in her eyes. When combined with her flower-like appearance, she suddenly had a much more lovable aura. When it came to controlling a man's mind, a woman of pleasure always had some methods. But unfortunately, her exquisite performance wasn't able to enter Qin Yu's heart at all, nor was it able to stir up any thoughts in him. From beneath the black robes, a low and deep voice suddenly sounded out, "Have them all leave." Miss Yin was startled. Her face paled a bit. She thought that she was finished. She was finished. This time, she had encountered a rough and straightforward fellow. Even if he had any thoughts, it would be to drink some wine and sing some songs. After some flirting with each other, they would finally go to bed together. It had to be known that these rough and uncouth men didn't understand what pity was. They also looked down on women. To say that they were heartless was already a light punishment. As Miss Yin thought about how the purity she had cultivated for so many years was about to be destroyed in the hands of such a rough and uncouth man, she felt a pang of bitterness in her heart. But she had already said that she couldn't refuse, otherwise her fate might be even more miserable than this. Thus, Miss Yin could only forcefully smile and wave her hand. "All of you leave. I will personally serve, sir." The group of maids revealed worried expressions, but they didn't dare to say anything. They respectfully bowed and drew back. In the blink of an eye, with the sound of the door closing, there was only the two of them left. Beneath the black robes, Miss Yun remained silent, waiting for her nightmare to descend. She looked at him with surprise. Just what did this rough and uncouth man mean? Could it be that she had to take the initiative in this sort of matter? Biting her lips, Miss Yin said in a soft voice, "Sir, how about I go make 2 dishes and share a few cups with you to relieve your fatigue? Or does sir want to go to sleep now?" She was scared, she was sad, and she was bitter. Beneath the black robes, Qin Yu closed his eyes. When he opened them again, they were clear and bright. There was a bitter smile on his face. As he thought, it was just that they looked exactly the same. She wasn't her. When Xin Yu first saw Miss Yun in this garden, he felt as if he had been struck by lightning. He nearly lost his composure on the spot. And this was the reason why he had been ridiculed by True Saint by Tuesday. But in truth, this was only a mere brothel. How could it shake his mind? The true reason was that this young lady in front of him was actually the same as Teacher Liao. No, it was more accurate to say that the two of them seemed to have come from the same mold. This was why Qin Yu had been so anxious. But now, everyone had withdrawn, and there were only the two of them left in the room. There was also no monitoring aura, and Miss Yin still looked the same. This could only mean that she wasn't Teacher Liao. Chapter 1467. Qin Yu was disappointed. One couldn't lie to themselves. In the endless years he had spent with her, he had come into contact with many outstanding women. But Liao Shi was the most special one. Even though they hadn't known each other for a long time, she had left behind an indelible memory in Qin Yu's mind. Perhaps there was an old saying that what was lost was always worth cherishing. She had suddenly disappeared, fading away in Qin Yu's arms. Because of this, she had become even more profound and unforgettable. After confirming Liao Shi's origins from the abyssal shadow, the truth was that Qin Yu had already prepared himself. But today, as he saw Yun Qing, who looked exactly like her, his mind shook and he instinctively felt a bit of anticipation. But now that he had found nothing, in addition to the fact that his emotions had been in a raging state ever since he entered the desolate region, now that he had calmed down, he felt even more empty and lost. Luckily, the black robes covered his entire body, concealing Qin Yu's emotions so no one noticed anything strange. "I'm hungry. Let's go make some side dishes." Miss Yin was happy, but she didn't dare to reveal it. She respectfully bowed and left. It had to be said that the young ladies of this restaurant all had their own unique skills. Even in the aspect of cooking, they all had extremely high standards. Qin Yu ate a few mouthfuls, surprise in his eyes. Although he had long since passed the stage where he could replenish his strength through eating and drinking, he still had enough respect for the beautiful things of this world. He began to eat more. Two maids carefully served wine at the side, their eyes sweeping over him from time to time. Within their warm and gentle eyes, there was a faint trace of worry. This was because today, this young lady's performance in cooking had been a bit excessive. It wasn't that every dish was carefully prepared or that she had used 120% of her skill, but that there were so many dishes on the table that it was nearly impossible to place them all. Although the two of them quietly arranged the dishes, trying to save as much space as possible while still maintaining a pleasing appearance, if they continued to cook, they really wouldn't be able to put them all down. Although this strange black-robed man was as calm and steady as he was at the start, who knew what was hidden beneath his appearance? Perhaps he would erupt in anger in the next moment. This was truly an incomparably torturous matter. The two maids still had warm smiles on their faces. Their fingers gently placed dishes, poured wine, and poured tea. But their backs were gradually soaked with sweat. In the small kitchen, Miss Yin was staring at the flames under the pot. Perhaps because she was too close, her face was roasted red. At this moment, beads of sweat seeped out of his forehead and cheeks, wetting his hair and sticking it to his face. She raised her hand and ran it through her hair. Her eyes didn't move at all, as if all her attention was focused on the dish she was cooking. The maid standing in the corner opened her mouth, wanting to say something, but hesitating. She knew what her young miss was thinking, but if things continued like this, something might really happen. He couldn't help but turn his head to look out the window. That little husky dyer had already gone out for a long time, but she still hadn't returned. Could it be that she was love-struck and had secretly gone to meet her little lover? The maidservant clenched her teeth. Although Dai was a bit of a troublemaker, she was extremely loyal to the young miss. She always knew what was important and what was not. Since she hadn't returned, that meant they hadn't found her yet. What should they do? After waiting for a while, the dish was ready. If he continued to put it in the pot, the taste would be greatly reduced. This dish was extremely slow to cook, but after it was finished, It had to be placed on a plate in a short period of time. Miss Yin let out a deep breath. She reached out to open the pot and ladle, her movements swift and skillful. Her actions were beautiful and pleasing to the eye. Serve the dishes. The maid bit her lips. Miss, there's enough food, Miss Yin smiled. Don't worry, this is the last dish. After I bathe and change my clothes, I will accompany you. The men of this world were indeed unreliable. No matter how many sweet words they spoke to her in ordinary times, they were completely unreliable in critical moments. In terms of when to advance or retreat, she was well aware that the black-robed guest hadn't been angered yet. He had already shown enough tolerance. This was a bit different from the rough man's previous judgment. She could only hope that he was a meticulous person and not too cold and heartless. The maid let out a sigh of relief. Then, she couldn't help but reveal a sad expression. She thought about how much hardship her young miss had suffered over the years. But in the end, she still couldn't escape this calamity. If she knew this would happen, she might as well have chosen that person years ago. She heard that although he didn't hold a high position in the imperial capital, he was still quite powerful. With her thoughts settled, Miss Yin calmed down. After all, she had already expected this to happen, so she wouldn't panic like an ordinary woman. She smiled and said, "Hurry and go. This dish requires a great deal of effort, and the ingredients are the best. It's best if you don't waste it." The maid restrained her expression and quickly left. After entering the reception pavilion, she handed over the dishes to the serving maid and said in a soft voice, "The miss said that today's dishes are enough. If guest wishes to taste more, you can only come again next time. The kitchen is filled with smoke and smoke." The miss will bathe and change her clothes first and will soon accompany you. Just how important was speaking? Now that the same matter came out of her mouth, it suddenly had a different flavor, as if it were only natural. In fact, it gave off a feeling that Miss Yin was doing her best to satisfy the guest. Beneath the black robes, Qin Yu smirked at the maid's clever mouth. Then he continued to eat and drink, his thoughts racing. Although he didn't know much right now, Qin Yu had obtained some harvest from True Saint by Tuesday. Although he couldn't completely outline what the future would look like, he could at least make some targeted considerations. For instance, he should have entered the Western Wilderness to complete something, and this matter just happened to synchronize with that woman's goal. Thus, she gave up and allowed Qin Yu to be summoned into the desolate domain by the Western Wilderness. There was a problem here. Did these two matters overlap, or were their goals the same? If it was the former, then that was fine. But if it was the latter, that would be troublesome. With his status as the ruler of darkness, he was summoned into the desolate domain by the Western Wilderness. But, in the end, he helped that woman fulfill her wish. What would happen to the Western Wilderness? Even if Qin Yu's identity wasn't exposed, there would likely be a great problem. As Qin Yu pondered, his aura became increasingly silent. But now this silence seemed a bit colder to the maids. Luckily, this feeling of dread and unease didn't last for too long before it was broken by the sound of bead curtains. After bathing and changing into a new dress, Miss Yin walked in with a light and fragrant scent. Her hair was slightly damp, and her skin was rosy and fair, as if it could be broken by the slightest breeze. Even the maids who were used to seeing this girl's beauty couldn't help but praise her from the bottom of their hearts. She really seemed like someone who had walked out from a painting. I was busy in the small kitchen and was delayed for a bit. Yin Qing asked for young master's forgiveness. As she spoke, she bowed, her long skirt cascading down, drawing out a charming and alluring scene. Miss Yin accepted her fate. As she bowed and asked for forgiveness, a maid waiting outside a mansion's side door had an anxious expression. She had been out for far too long. Even if this girl could think a way to delay for a while, she had already reached her limit. If she didn't hurry over now, then she really wouldn't make it. Just as her heart was burning and she was so anxious that she wished she could rush in, her eyes suddenly widened and she revealed a look of pleasant surprise. She jumped up and down, waving her hands. Young master, over here." The side door opened a crack, and a luxuriously dressed young master walked out with a tired expression. He smiled as he saw her. "Dyer, what's wrong with you today?" Why are you so impatient to see me so soon?" Although his words were light and flirtatious, they didn't make one loathe him. Rather, they naturally exuded a carefree and casual air. Indeed, in this world, appearance was number one. If a lazy and ugly man were to say these words, this young girl would have already exploded with rage and cursed him for being a toad with such a big mouth. With a blushing face, the maid called Dyer and stamped her feet. She reached out and pulled him away. "Hurry, hurry, it's too late." The young master's complexion changed. "Is there a problem with Yin Qing?" His mind was sharp, and he immediately thought of the root cause. The maid nodded again and again. The young master stopped and shouted out loud, "Prepare the carriage." There was an honored guest in the manor. He originally only wanted to say a few words to her before leaving, but now he couldn't care about such things. With his father covering for him, that person wouldn't blame him. After all, he had always given off a warm and kind impression. Soon, a jet-black carriage pulled by a white horse stopped in front of the two. The young master pulled the maid up. "Go to Miss Yin Qing's place. Hurry." Although his voice was calm, if the young master said to be quick, then they had to be quick. The coachman cracked his whip, and there was a light cracking sound in the air. The carriage steadily moved forward, and the scenery outside the window flew past, leaving behind afterimages. After listening to the maid's explanation, the young master, who was ranked in the top 3 of the second generation, frowned. A trace of anger flashed in his eyes. Yin Qing was someone he fancied. Who in Seawatch City didn't know this? He wanted to see just where this uninvited guest had come from. Instinctively, he felt something was wrong. After all, the owner of this brothel could barely be considered one of them. He shouldn't act rashly. Even if he had no other choice, he should have sent someone to inform him of the reason rather than have Dyer wait outside the manor. But at this time, the young master's chest burned with rage. His thoughts became a lot slower. With just a thought, he flipped over. Faster. Listening to the young master's cold voice, the coachman frowned. He lifted his whip and cracked it again. Bang! A powerful aura burst out from his body. Through the reins in his hands, it poured into the white horse, pulling the carriage, causing it to speed up even more. The carriage rushed into the air. Cries of alarm rang out as it raced towards the beautiful lake. This was clearly a violation of the city's rules. The city guards quickly responded, but before they could complete the encirclement, they received an order to stay where they were and then cancel the operation. What nonsense! Although this carriage was ordinary and didn't have a clan emblem on it, the identity of the person driving the carriage had already been recorded by the city guards. The carriage of the City Lord Mansion was stopped by the city guards in front of everyone. Our Lord Commander doesn't have such courage. Looking at the carriage whistling away, the city guards had calm expressions. This world was unfair to begin with. There would always be people who enjoyed special privileges. They weren't those strict and unruly barbarians that feared nothing in the heavens or earth. Since they had fallen into the ranks of the city guards, they had to get used to the occasional special exception that popped up. Violating the rules represented speed and efficiency. Thus, the carriage only took 1/10 of the time it normally would to arrive at the lake. Although this was only a remote property, with their status, they still had to express the respect they deserved. Before the carriage came to a stop, it was pushed open with a loud bang. The young master flew in with Dyer in tow. The coachman frowned, a bit of worry in his eyes, as if he were worried about his young master's safety. After thinking for a moment, he handed the carriage to a servant to temporarily take care of. Then, he patted the white horse and calmly followed after them. Although he was dressed as a servant, no one in the building dared to stop him. They all bowed on their eyes. The coachman had an indifferent expression, turning a blind eye to all of this. He passed through the bustling and clamorous front court and entered the quiet and secluded lake. As he looked up, he just happened to hear a loud bang as well as a faint, angry roar. It was the young master. The driver frowned. He didn't dare to delay any longer. He took a step forward and his figure suddenly vanished. In the next moment, he appeared outside the small courtyard that was violently shaking and releasing a blinding light. As the young master saw him, his complexion paled. He clenched his teeth and roared, Go, break open the door." "Yes." The coachman responded in a low voice. He ignored the angry shouts around him, as well as the noise coming from the front court. He stepped forward and pressed his hand down. It was done casually and without the slightest burst of aura. It was just a palm that seemed to brush away luo shui, yet it caused the tightly shut door in front of them to shatter with a bang. The powerful aura that surged out even blasted into the walls on both sides of the courtyard, destroying the defensive restrictions as easily as crushing dry weeds and smashing rotten wood. Instantly, countless bricks and stones were sent flying in all directions, and in the next moment, they were crushed into powder by the terrifying aura. One uproar. The surface of the lake was hit by the violent aura. With a low and dull boom, it immediately stirred up layers of turbulent waves. The ups and downs caused a series of exclamations. "Stop!" Amidst the angry roars, the guards responsible for the safety of the building finally rushed over with the momentum of tigers and wolves. The flagstones under the leader's feet were all shattered. It could be seen that his cultivation was tyrannical and that he was angry at this moment. The branch had been operating in Seawatch City for many years. Tonight was the first time that such a wantonly invasion had occurred. Of course, this was his dereliction of duty. Thinking of the boss's strength and the rich income he received, the guard leader's eyes narrowed. He said coldly, "Take them all down. Kill anyone who dares to resist. This matter must be dealt with cleanly and beautifully." The door was smashed and the walls collapsed. Smoke and dust rose into the sky, obscuring the sight of the intruders. They couldn't see clearly who was causing trouble, and the news from the front court hadn't had time to spread in this short period of time. The young master clenched his teeth and sneered. "I want to see in this Seawatch City who has the guts to touch me." The coachman lifted his hand, and the dust in the air instantly dispersed. The guard leader's face had already changed. When he saw the cold eyes of the young master, his heart palpitated, and he almost collapsed to the ground. He knelt down with a pale face. "Greetings, young Master Chun. I didn't know it was you today. I didn't mean to offend you. Please forgive me." He kowtowed again and again, followed by a series of slaps in the face. Chapter 1468. With the door broken and the walls broken, this naturally alarmed the people in the courtyard. You could faintly hear the sounds coming from outside. Beneath his black robes, his expression was calm. There had never been a lack of jealousy and strife in pleasure grounds. But he didn't plan on personally joining in. Thus, when Miss Yun's complexion paled and she forced herself to calm down and asked him to wait a moment, Yu nodded and didn't say anything. Seeing him express his stance and the black-robed guest who had maintained his composure from beginning to end, Miss Yun felt gratitude in her heart. He vaguely felt that his previous conjecture was probably wrong. How could a straightforward and rough man have such a calm mind? Although she hadn't left yet, she could guess who was outside. At this time, she couldn't help but feel a bit anxious. That noble young master of the City Lord Mansion, although he usually appeared carefree, was actually a ruthless and possessive person deep in his bones. It was because she was aware of this that even though she had been chased by this young master for a long time, Miss Yun didn't dare to relent. She could only maintain a distance between them. Today, she was forced to ask Butterfly for help. She originally only wanted to invite him and borrow the City Lord Mansion's status to tide over today's crisis. But she never imagined that his anger would be far greater than she imagined. As she led her people outside, Miss Yun revealed a worried expression. She didn't know what method she could use to resolve today's matters. It wasn't that she had some sort of impression of Yu, but that once the two sides clashed, no matter who won in the end, the result wasn't something that a mere brothel girl like her could withstand. She passed through the round door and emerged from behind the screen wall. She saw that the courtyard entrance was in a complete mess. The guard captain was kneeling on the ground and slapping himself. His face was swollen and dark red beads of blood seeped out from his nose and mouth. Miss Yun's heart raced, and she groaned inwardly. This person had even torn off his usual hypocrisy. It was clear that he was truly angry. She took a deep breath and steadied her mind. Then, she bowed with a pale face. Yin Qing greets Sir Chun. I wonder what happened today that caused Sir Chun to be so angry? Chun Shanglu's cold eyes swept over her, a bit of loathing in them. He coldly snorted but didn't speak. At the side, the pale-faced little butterfly said in a trembling voice, Miss, just now at the entrance of our small courtyard hung red lanterns. Miss Yen's face also turned pale. She immediately understood why this noble young master of the city lord's mansion was so cold and heartless. She naturally knew the rules of the building. Each of the courtyards by the lake was occupied by a top-notch beauty. Although they usually received distinguished guests from all over the world, they basically never stayed overnight. However, once there was an exception. A red light would be hung outside the courtyard, signifying that there was a joyous occasion in the small courtyard today, and the beauty inside had found partner. Did the building make the decision on its own? However, this matter had not been confirmed with her. Why did they hang up the red lanterns? No wonder Qin Shanglu was so angry. His usual gentleness and consideration towards her was completely gone. Miss Yin knew that she was currently in an extremely disadvantageous situation. No matter what the reason was, her reputation would be tarnished if a red light was hung up. After tonight, he wouldn't have the right to continue staying in this small courtyard by the lake. Not to mention, everyone would know that she had offended the noble young master of the city lord's mansion. How would she be able to establish herself in Guanhai City in the future? Taking a deep breath, Miss Yun bowed and said, Although I do not know why a red light was suddenly hung outside my courtyard, what Yin Qing wants to say is that this is a misunderstanding. I was entertaining a distinguished guest with my maidservants and did not do anything that was out of line. The tranquility of the small lake was broken. Many courtyard doors opened, and maidservants were sent out to stand on tiptoe, looking in from afar. And at this moment, from the noisy vestibule of the vestibule, there was a sudden cry of surprise, followed by a burst of suppressed laughter. Although it was suppressed, it was full of mockery. Which one of the beauties in the lake behind Linyue brothel was not a drool-worthy, peerless beauty? It was extremely difficult for an ordinary person to even meet one of them. Who could imagine that a red lantern had been quietly hung up today? Not to mention that the one who had hung up the red lantern was actually Miss Yin Qing. Such explosive news naturally caused a crowd of guests to exclaim in surprise. Many of them slapped their thighs in pain, their faces filled with sorrow. However, there were even more guests who could not help but laugh softly after a brief moment of shock and astonishment. This was especially so when they found out that the noble young master of the city, Lord Manor, was currently catching the adulterer by the lake. The laughter in their hearts became even more comical. Everyone in Seawatch City knew that young Master Chun had a special liking for Miss Yin Qing. He had been a frequent guest of the courtyard for many years. Although he had not truly entered the room, everyone knew that it was only a matter of time. But now, someone had beaten him to it. In this way, it was understandable why the noble young master of the city governor's estate would be so furious that he couldn't even care less about his usual casual and carefree demeanor. Naturally, the strength of the city Lord Manor was the strongest in Seawatch City. However, it did not mean that they could cover the sky with one hand. A large city had a radius of more than 50,000 kilometers. There were countless entanglements of interests involved, and there were naturally many different factions within it. Naturally, no one would openly challenge the position of the city Lord Manor. After all, City Lord Chun was the trusted aide of the emperor. However, through today's incident, they could viciously mock this noble young master who was usually good at doing things, thereby damaging his reputation. The Lunar Descent brothel was extremely expensive. Unless one was a wealthy merchant or someone from a prestigious family, no one dared enter. Thus, there were many people gathered here. Under the influence of alcohol and the belief that the law did not punish the masses, those who were usually angry with the city Lord Manor became bolder. Thus, there were waves of one mockery. The laughter was carried to the lake by the cool breeze. Chun Shanglu, who was already livid, clenched his fists tightly within his sleeves. His face was slightly twisted, revealing a hint of malevolence. Although he was an extremely intelligent young man, he had not experienced any setbacks. It was difficult for him to not show his emotions, and even more difficult for him to control his thoughts when he was angry. The laughter in the front yard and the indistinct gazes from all around the lake were like swallowing a red-hot soldering iron, burning his body and mind, followed by endless violence. Of course, the premise that Qinshan Lu dared to have such violent thoughts was that he believed that even if he poked a hole in the sky at the lunar descent brothel today, it would not cause any big trouble. Although he needed to show due respect to this business, he believed that the other party wouldn't disregard his father's attitude just because of a little bit of impudence after being humiliated. His eyes stared gloomily at Miss Yun. The coldness in his eyes made her face pale, as if she had fallen into an ice cave. Yun Qing, where's the person you chose? I would like to see what kind of person he is. Or does this person only dare to hide behind a woman and be a coward? Miss Yun heard the violence and bloodthirst in his words and said with a trembling voice, "Young Master Chun, Yun Qing can assure you that nothing has happened. All of this is just a misunderstanding." Gritting her teeth, she lowered her voice. "If you do not believe me, I am willing to let the nannies in your manor verify my identity to prove my innocence." Miss Xiao Dai naturally knew the humiliation that Miss had suffered. With a thud, she knelt down and grabbed a corner of Chun Shanglu's luxurious robe. "Young master, my miss would never lie to you. Since she said it was a misunderstanding, there must be another reason. Please believe in my Mississippi." Chun Shanglu's eyes revealed a trace of hesitation as he looked at the pale Yun Qing. He knew the capabilities of the nannies in the manor. Since they dared to say such things, could it really be a misunderstanding? But very quickly, Chun Shanglu's eyes darkened again. The truth was no longer important now. Even if he ordered the nannies to verify that Yun Qing was still a virgin, so what? Everyone in the city would think that this was an excuse that Chun Shanglu had purposely given to cover up for himself. It would only invite more ridicule. Today, if they were not at the lakeside, there would still be some leeway. But since they were already here, their face had already been thrown to the ground and trampled on. They would even think of ways to attack the prestige of the city, Lord's Manor, through this matter. Although they were far away, did they really not hear the loudest people in the front courtyard? If they dared to do this, they must have a plan in mind. He had to pick up the face that had fallen to the ground with his own hands. Only then could he prevent the situation from worsening and prevent his father from being implicated. After all, this was a very critical moment. The day before yesterday, his father had submitted a secret memorial to the desolate emperor to defend himself. There must not be any more disturbances. Thinking of this, Chun Shanglu's eyes were filled with anger. If not for this little slut, he would have been drinking with a distinguished guest and would not have been humiliated like this. Scram! With a kick, Xiao Dai immediately vomited blood and fell to the ground. Although he did not hit her heavily, a kick filled with hatred was not something that this weak brothel maid could withstand. Yun Qing cried out in sorrow, "Xiao Dai!" She rushed over and hugged her in her arms. She looked up at Qin Shanglu. Although she was still suppressing her emotions, she could not help but reveal a trace of resentment in her sorrowful eyes. Although Chun Shanglu did not place Yun Qing in a very important position in his heart, he naturally felt some affection for her since they had been chasing each other for so many years. Otherwise, when he saw the red lantern, he would not have been so enraged and torn apart his pretense. Now that he sensed her eyes, his heart trembled and a bit of guilt rose up in him. But soon it turned into callousness. He knew that it was likely impossible for him to obtain this woman's affection. But that didn't matter. Even if he couldn't obtain her heart, there would always be a way to obtain her body. Moreover, there were countless beautiful women in this world who knew how to appreciate others. Thinking of this, Chun Shanglu's eyes turned even colder. He sneered. "It seems that Miss Yun Qing likes this person. You would rather have your maid suffer than have him step forward." He waved his hand and said, "Go and invite the person inside to come out." Give him a chance to reveal his identity. If he can suppress the city lore mansion, I will personally apologize to him and leave, pretending that nothing happened today. But if not, then I will kill him and let him know that in this world, not just any woman can be touched so easily. Qin Yu helplessly discovered that this farce of jealousy wasn't something he could escape from just because he wanted to. Although this person hadn't approached yet, a tyrannical aura had already locked onto him from afar. It was wild and oppressive, making it hard for him to breathe. Half-saint. Beneath the black robes, Qin Yu's lips twitched. If he didn't personally experience this, who would have thought that a mere dispute in a brothel would actually involve someone from the divine path? Even if this was the Western wilderness, this was still far too absurd. The only explanation was that this person had an extraordinary status. In other words, Qin Yu hadn't done anything at all. All he had done was calmly eat a table full of dishes, and yet he had stirred up trouble for himself. He wasn't afraid. After all, in this city, even the person with the most tyrannical and obscure aura might not be able to do anything to him. But this was the Western wilderness, and Qin Yu had just arrived. He didn't want to cause any trouble, so he frowned. He picked up the wine cup in front of him and tossed it away. The wine cup passed through the door. With a dull thud, it sank into the courtyard floor, leaving behind a bottomless hole. In the surrounding area, countless tiny cracks appeared. They spread outwards, each one releasing a cold aura. A low and calm voice echoed out from the room. "This is only a misunderstanding. Let's end it here." The carriage driver stared at the hole in the ground, not too far away. He frowned, and his eyes instantly darkened. Cracks appeared around the hole. It seemed as if he hadn't been able to completely control his strength, thus causing it to leak outwards. But in truth, the carriage driver was well aware that this was something the other party had done on purpose. He had revealed his aura as a warning. Chen Shanglu frowned. He coldly said, "A cup is enough to scare you." Chapter 1469. The carriage driver should have turned around and given him a warning. After all, a true saint-level powerhouse was someone that even the city lord mansion had to give a certain amount of respect. But for some unknown reason, he was only silent for a moment before he continued walking towards the room, the chill in his eyes even thicker. Beneath the black robes, Qin Yu frowned. He was sure that the other party had felt the warning he had given by throwing out the cup. But even so, the other party didn't seem to have any intention of giving up. This inevitably caused Qin Yu to doubt true Saint Baiyu's words. Could it be that a true saint-level cultivator wasn't anything special in the Western Desolate? Otherwise, how could he have lost so much face? Thinking back to what he had just heard, Qin Yu's frown deepened. He faintly felt that something was wrong. Could it be that this matter of jealousy in a brothel wasn't as simple as it seemed on the surface? Bang! The door to the room shattered and exploded. Wild strength swept out, wrapping around countless fragments of different sizes and sweeping out at an astonishing speed. This was the other party's probing attack, but it also exposed his hidden secret. This person had concealed his cultivation. Above a half-saint was naturally a true saint. Moreover, this was a powerful and ruthless individual that excelled in close combat. Beneath the black robes, a cold light bloomed in Qin Yu's eyes. He could basically confirm that there was a hidden story behind today's events. For a solemn true saint powerhouse to hide his aura and interfere in a matter of jealousy in a brothel was already extremely comical. But now his aura was overflowing with killing intent. It was clear he had cruel thoughts in mind. Was he targeting true Saint Baiyu? This was Qin Yu's first thought. After all, it was clear that this other party had a certain status in the Western Desolate. As for those in a high position, although they could enjoy limitless glory, they would inevitably provoke powerful enemies from all sides because of their conflicts of interest. Qin Yu had just entered the desolate region. Besides this storm, he had never come into contact with anyone else, so he naturally didn't have any enmity with them. Since there was a hidden story behind this, it could only be caused by true Saint Baiyu. This judgment left Qin Yu depressed. Although he had obtained some information from true Saint Baitu, It was relatively simple and wasn't worth the price he was paying today. But no matter what he thought, the other party had already arrived in front of him. Whether it was worth it or not, he could only temporarily receive it. After that, she would ask him for compensation. She couldn't just become this fellow's shield for no reason. He raised his hand and slapped the table. Boom! A terrifying power erupted, and the table instantly collapsed. Everything rushed out of the door. Although there weren't many fragments on the table, it gave off the feeling that it was vast and mighty, like a raging river. The coachman, who had just barged into the room, had a stern and calm expression on his face. He felt that his aura had been completely locked onto, and he was unable to dodge at all. His original plan was to hide his cultivation and get close to his opponent before unleashing a sure-kill attack. However, he no longer had the chance to do so. With a loud shout, the bones and flesh in his body crackled. His entire body suddenly swelled up, and he raised his hand and struck out heavily. With a single punch, it gave off an unstoppable feeling, as if even a myriad of rivers and mountains would be pierced through by a single punch. A wild strength rushed out like a wild tiger, breaking into the table fragments. It wanted to forcefully tear open a gap and kill Chinyu on the spot. But this person had clearly underestimated the terrifying strength that was released from Chinyu's palm strike. The fragments of the round table were shaken to pieces by the collision of these two astonishing strengths. But they had nearly exhausted all of their tiger-like wild strength. Even so, they still had enough strength left over to sweep up countless splinters of wood and dust as they hurtled towards the carriage driver. The coachman cried out as if he had been frightened. But his expression remained calm, and his eyes were calm, without the least bit of emotion. His expression didn't match his cry at all. This was because the coachman had other methods. He had received orders to kill the cultivator in the room, and he already knew that this person was tyrannically strong. Even a true saint wouldn't be his match. Thus, the true killing move was only being used now. But the truth was that the closer he was, the greater his chances of success were. A flash of hesitation flashed in the coachman's eyes. Then, he clenched his teeth and bravely stepped forwards towards the splinters of wood. Zila, like a piece of paper being flipped, the coachman's face was instantly sliced open with countless small wounds. There was even a sharp wooden spike that pierced through the defense of his face and directly pierced into his eye. With a muffled groan, blood instantly gushed out. By paying the price of an eye, the coachman had advanced a step further. Now, there was less than 10 feet between him and Chinyu. This distance was enough. With a light cracking sound, the coachman's left index finger exploded into pieces, turning into a dark red fog of blood. Shwa! In the next moment, it vanished from where it stood. Then, it flashed once more and covered Chinyu. Success! The coachman didn't know who he was trying to kill, but he was confident in the influence behind him. Since he was covered by the blood fog, even if this person had transcendent methods, he would still find it hard to escape death. Joy gushed out from the depths of his heart. The corners of his lips curled up, but he froze in the next moment. Of course, it wasn't because his smile pulled at the wounds on his face, but because beneath the cover of the blood fog, it gave off a feeling of nothingness, as if he had wrapped himself in air. He had been tricked. The other party had been prepared for this. The coachman stomped his feet and began to rapidly retreat. He knew that his target was strong, and since his killing move didn't work, his best choice was to immediately flee. However, just as the coachman's figure moved, before he could even retreat, boundless darkness suddenly descended like the curtain of night. Shenshangle's heart skipped a beat. He fiercely looked towards the courtyard. Darkness surged out from within, instantly covering the entire courtyard. The other party clearly had an extremely high level of control over their own strength. When they reached the courtyard gates, they stopped and didn't disperse in the slightest. Even so, Chun Shangle could feel an icy cold aura from this darkness, as well as a dreadful aura that left one's heart racing. It was like an eternal night had arrived, like an abyss that could swallow all things. It represented endless slaughter and destruction. He had kicked an iron plate. Chun Shangle's complexion paled. The only thing that made him feel at ease was that the other party clearly feared the strength of the City Lord Mansion and didn't want to make a scene. Thus, they restrained their strength and didn't involve him. Previously, Chun Shangle had said that if the other party's status was enough to suppress him, he would forget about today's matter. But in the desolate domain, strength meant everything. It was obvious that the person in the courtyard had enough strength to make Chun Shangle change his mind. He was extremely angry, but it was just a woman. It wasn't worth it to provoke such a strong enemy. Although the City Lord Mansion wasn't afraid, this world wasn't a place where one could do whatever they wanted without fear. Moreover, such a strong expert couldn't be alone. There had to be someone backing him. If he wasn't careful, he might cause big trouble. Chun Shangle could be considered the #1 hedonistic son of Guanhai City, but that was only limited to Guanhai City. The desolate domain was vast, and there were countless people with stronger backgrounds than him. Chun Shangle, who had received a strict education since he was young, was well aware of this. Although he had done many cruel and absurd things over the years, he had never caused any real trouble. But today, Chun Shangle was prepared to give up. Although losing face was something that was extremely depressing and difficult to accept, it was nothing compared to his own interests. Perhaps he could find a way to make friends with the person in the courtyard. This was the so-called no discord, no concord. His thoughts raced quickly. This proved that Chun Shangle was a smart person, but this didn't guarantee that things would develop in the direction he hoped for. Whoosh, whoosh, there was the sound of breaking air. 2 shadows flew out, roaring, "Protect the young master." Although they said this, the 2 of them didn't even glance at Chun Shangle. At this time, Chun Shangle's expression was constantly changing as he boldly rushed into the pitch-black darkness. Chun Shangle's complexion changed. He didn't know when 2 super strong, true saint-level bodyguards had appeared by his side. Since they weren't his people, there was only one explanation. Someone hoped that the outside world would think that these 2 people were from the City Lord Mansion. In other words, it was Shui Pan. He had been used. Who was it? And who was the person in the courtyard? Who could tell him just what was going on here? The darkness suddenly began to violently tumble about. A deep and low rumbling sound spread out like thunder. The nearby lake seemed to boil over, causing countless waves to rise up, causing cries of alarm to ring out from the vestibule. It was clear that the slaughter had already begun and his own driver was still involved. In addition to that shout from before, it was as if mud had fallen into one's pants. Even if one had 18 mouths, it would be hard to explain. Chun Shangle's complexion paled. He roared out, "Where are the city guards?" His eyes were cold and gloomy as he stubbornly stared at the darkness that covered the courtyard. No matter who it was, he had to control the situation and not let a single person escape. It wouldn't be so simple to drag the City Lord Mansion down with him. As he roared, the sound of breaking air filled the air. A large number of city guards descended upon descending Moon Hall. "Young master," the captain solemnly bowed. Chun Shangle's heart settled. Since the city guards had arrived, it wouldn't be easy for the other party to escape. And if he waited a little longer, the City Lord Mansion would soon respond and send powerhouses to suppress them. At that time, none of them would be able to escape. Surround them. Don't let even a fly escape. Chun Shangle coldly said. On the surface, the situation seemed to be under his control, but for some reason, he felt uneasy. Although he didn't know the identities of the 2 parties and what their motives were, since they dared to plot against the City Lord Mansion, they naturally had a certain level of confidence. In other words, he didn't know what the outcome of this matter would be. Thinking of this, Chun Shangle's heart became even more gloomy. He glanced at the pale and shaken Yun Qing from the corner of his eye. Although her expression was flawless, the women in the hall had always been good at putting on an act. Regardless of whether this matter had anything to do with her, she had to be apprehended and interrogated after this. Even if she was innocent, it was ultimately because of her that he was involved and the City Lord Mansion was involved. I can't just let this matter rest like this. Yin Qing raised her head and exchanged glances with Chun Shangle. Her body stiffened and her face turned even paler. She had long known that this noble son of the city lord mansion was not a kind person. Now that they had fallen out, based on his personality, he would definitely not let this matter rest. But she was like a fish on the chopping block. Even if she sensed danger, what could she do? Thinking of this, Yin Qing's heart became even more miserable. She hugged Dai tightly, tears rolling down her cheeks. Guanhai City had always been peaceful. Firstly, the city lord mansion was extremely domineering. After punishing a few offending actions, no one dared to provoke them easily. Secondly, the entire West Wilderness was under the rule of the capital and was in a relatively stable state. However, this did not mean that it did not have the ability to deal with sudden situations. The city lord was entertaining important guests when he received the news. After a quick analysis of the situation, the two deputies in the city immediately made a decision. One of them stayed in the residence to look after the situation, while the other led the experts in the residence and soared into the sky. In the living room, True Saint by Su frowned slightly and looked outside. On the main seat, the city lord of Guanhai City, Chun Yuanshin, smiled and said calmly, "Perhaps there was an accident. After all, the city is too big and there are bound to be some mistakes in the management. Nephew Bai Su, please don't tell on me." He was calm and collected, full of confidence as he spoke. Chun Yuanshin had risen up from the wilderness and eventually became the city lord of a large city. He had experienced many ups and downs and would naturally not care about such a small matter. Chapter 1470. Moon Pavilion. In the sound of breaking the air, Deputy General Su Shun led the masters of the mansion to arrive, and a powerful pressure was released in an instant. Humph! With a cold snort, Su Shun's eyes swept around. At this moment, the inside and outside of the lake instantly fell into silence. It was said before that no one in Sea-Watch City dared to openly provoke the city lord mansion. Another reason was that Su Shan's cultivation was tyrannical. He had long been a true saint. His cultivation was getting more and more perfect. It was rumored that within 100 years, he was likely to break through the Dominator realm. In addition, his temperament was cold, and his means were extremely overbearing. So far, it was known that he had personally made a move 4 times, and each time, a true saint would die. Naturally, no one wanted to provoke the city lord mansion's deputy general. Chun Shanglu did not have the pride and arrogance of a young master in the mansion. He quickly bowed and saluted. "Uncle Su is here. I can rest assured." This was by no means a compliment, but a real relief from the bottom of his heart. Since Su Shun personally suppressed it, no one could make a splash. The facts of the past were enough to prove this point. Su Shun returned the salute. He did not have the slightest arrogance because of Chun Shanglu's courtesy. "Young master, do you know what happened here?" Chun Shanglu's eyes burst with coldness. "I don't want to hide it from Uncle Su. Although I am trapped, I don't know what happened. This is really a joke. But in order for me not to become a laughingstock of the entire city, I will have to trouble Uncle Su to make a move and kill everyone in the darkness. I have to make things clear. After all, the city lore mansion is not a scapegoat." In the last sentence, there was a murderous intention. Su Shun immediately understood the meaning of the words. Today's matter was directed at Chen Shanglu, but in fact, it was directed at the city lore mansion. Obviously, there was a big conspiracy. As an important member of the city lord mansion, Su Shun had always admired and respected the city lord. If it were not for the city lord's promotion, there would never be today's Su Shun. In addition, he and the city lord had long been an inseparable union, and the two sides had consistent interests. Whether it was out of his heart or practical considerations, Su Shun would never allow someone to plot against the city lord. Su Shun narrowed his eyes and waved coldly, "Surround." Behind him, many experts from the city lord's mansion spread out and sealed off the darkness that covered the courtyard. Like Chun Shanglu, Deputy General Su Shun also thought of the storm that the city lord residents had just experienced not long ago. With the status of a city lord, He needed to personally submit a secret memorial to His Majesty the Desolate Emperor to ensure that he was not involved in that matter. Now that the attitude of the imperial capital was ambiguous, no one knew whether that matter would stop or further expand the scope of investigation. But no matter how things developed, the most important thing for the City Lore Mansion to do now was to remain silent and not continue to stir up trouble. However, from what had happened today, it seemed that someone did not wish for the City Lord's mansion to remain silent. Su Shun's eyes were cold. After thinking about it, he took out a token and handed it to his confidant. He whispered a few words, and the man soared into the sky. Very quickly, a large number of city guards arrived at the Lunar Descent restaurant, directly locking it down and bringing it under their complete control, sealing off any possibility of an accident occurring. The darkness that enveloped the courtyard was still shaking violently. It was obvious that the battle inside was still going on. Su Shun could perceive the powerful aura that was bursting out. He frowned and immediately calmed down. The reason for the calmness was very simple. No matter where they came from or what their purpose was, Su Shun was confident that he could suppress the situation and control everything in his hands. As long as he caught these people, Su Shun could open their mouths and find out the whole thing. If he wanted to keep them alive, he couldn't just watch from the sidelines. In case someone was killed inside, many things may be buried forever. Su Shun took a deep breath and took a step forward. His aura instantly changed. It was like a long knife was suddenly unsheathed. The cold light soared and shone in the sky, releasing endless killing intent. Boom! With a punch, the darkness was instantly torn from the middle. As the saying goes, a skilled person is bold. Su Shun did not hesitate and stepped into it. Rumble. The next moment, the darkness in front of him suddenly tumbled more fiercely, and an increasingly terrifying aura gushed out from it. Kacha! Kacha! In the depths of the lake, the mud and stones were brutally torn apart, creating several bottomless cracks. It was like a ferocious mouth, crazily swallowing the lake water, forming a huge whirlpool. In the midst of the exclamation, a group of lights flew up, wrapping around the guests and various beauties. They fled in panic. The next moment, in the luxurious and exquisite vestibule area, the entire high-rise building collapsed. It collapsed. The boss of the descending moon hall rarely appeared. It was rumored that he had a great background. At this moment, he appeared in the flustered crowd. His eyes widened as he looked at the scene in front of him. His face instantly turned pale, and his body trembled slightly. Things were getting out of hand. They would definitely not let it go. Once they found out that it was him, he had no confidence that he could survive. After a brief moment of hesitation, a trace of sadness appeared on his face. The boss raised his hand and slapped between his eyebrows. With a muffled sound, red and white matter splashed everywhere. The headless corpse fell on its back, and blood gushed out from the broken neck like a fountain. There was another exclamation in the crowd. The faces of those who knew his identity changed slightly. They quietly retreated to the back of the crowd and nervously sent a message to the outside. Originally, they thought that today was a farce of jealousy, but who would have expected that things would get out of hand? First, Su Shun personally came with people, and then a large number of city guards blocked the descending moon hall. And now, the nominal boss of this building actually committed suicide in his own building. Even if they used their knees to think, they would know that it was definitely not simple. Something happened. Something big happened. Chen Shangolv had already learned that the boss of the descending moon hall committed suicide. His heart thumped heavily, and his face became more and more livid. But now, he couldn't care about this for the time being, because Su Shun had been fighting in the darkness for a long time, but he had not suppressed the strong enemy. At this time, the darkness surged violently, like an inflated and squirming stomach, giving people an extremely terrifying and strange feeling. Suddenly, a terrible thought flashed through his mind like lightning, making Chen Shangolv's body stiff, and his eyes were filled with horror. Could it be that everything today was just a trap, specifically aimed at the City Lore Mansion? Su Shun brazenly rushed into the darkness, and was the prey that fell into the trap. Chen Shangolv opened his mouth and was about to roar and summon the city guards to attack. But at this time there was a sudden cough in his ears, and then an icy cold hand directly grabbed his neck. "Tell them to stop and don't move." Chen Shangolv glanced at the black-robed figure. He didn't know the identity of the person who came, but he felt a chill on his neck and the hairs on his back suddenly stood up. And at this moment, the city guards in front of Chen Shangolv discovered the sudden appearance of the black-robed person. They all roared in anger. "Let go of the young master." Qin Yu coughed a few more times, and under the black robe, there was a flash of amazement in his eyes. He thought that this person was worthy of being a powerhouse of the desolate region. His methods were truly terrifying and amazing. With his cultivation, he almost suffered a great loss. It had to be known that in the vast young world, ordinary true saints couldn't be said to be as simple as chopping vegetables, but they couldn't be considered anything too difficult. How could they be as distressed as they were now? His thoughts turned quickly, and his eyes swept over the noisy city guards who were eager to try. He suddenly clenched his fists and said calmly, "Tell them to be quiet." Loud voices can't solve the problem, and they can't die for you. Chen Shangol's heart trembled. He forced himself to remain calm and raised a hand to stop the city guards from continuing to roar. He slowly said, "I hope you know who you are holding in your hands right now." He took a deep breath, and his voice became even calmer. His eyes were calm and steady. "I am Chen Shangolv, the only son of Sigei's city's city lord Chen Yuanshan. No matter who you are, if you dare to touch me, there is no way you can leave Sigei's city alive. So, no matter what you want to do, you had best think clearly about whether or not you can withstand the consequences." His last words were filled with threats. In this world, no one was an independent individual. There were always some people that you cared about and were close to. If you lost your life, that was fine. But if you weren't careful, you might bring a terrifying calamity upon them. Qin Yu turned his head to look at Chen Shangolv. Although his face was slightly pale, he was still as calm and composed as before. He was a bit surprised by Chen Shangolv's current performance. It seemed that there were some outstanding characters amongst the second generation of Silk Pants. In terms of temperament, Chen Shangolv was clearly one of them. But that was it. So, he only nodded and said, "I know." These 3 words were spoken in a light and casual tone, without any hint of emotion. Chen Shangolv felt as if his threats had fallen into thin air. His heart trembled, and a great sense of unease rose up in him. His intuition told him that this black-robed person in front of him was an extremely terrifying character. It seemed as if he didn't fear the strength of the city lord mansion at all. The darkness that covered the courtyard suddenly vanished without warning, revealing 3 corpses lying on the ground. One of them was the carriage driver from the city lord mansion. This person's eyes widened, and he revealed a horrified expression, as if he had just experienced an extremely terrifying event. The other 2 people had died miserable deaths. One of them had a hole pierced through his chest, and his heart, that should have been beating, had long since disappeared. In addition, the other person's back was broken. His entire body bent backwards at an astonishing angle, and his body was almost stacked together. In just a moment, 3 true saints had fallen here. Although this was the desolate region's sea-viewing city with countless powerhouses, such a terrible event hadn't happened in a long time. Su Shun's face was gloomy. He stepped towards Qin Yu. His eyes narrowed, and his lips curved up in a cold arc. "Sir, your words are too euphemistic, but I come from the border army. I always do things directly, and I don't like to beat around the bush. So, I can tell you bluntly that if the young master is harmed in any way, you and everyone around you will die, and you will die miserably." Qin Yu coughed and tasted a bit of blood in his mouth. He couldn't help but feel a bit more annoyed. He thought that Su Shan's sneak attack just now almost injured him. Now that his weakness has been caught, he still dares to speak such nonsense. He is really more arrogant than me. His heart was angry and his fingers tightened. Chen Shangolv, who was caught, suddenly suffered. His face flushed red with pain. I am not stupid. The meaning is very clear, so there is no need to say the same threat twice. In addition, you'd better stop now. I'm not too courageous. If I am shocked and my hand trembles, it is hard to say whether I will die or not. But Chen Shangle will definitely die in front of me. Su Shun's face was expressionless, as if he had not heard Qin Yu's words. He still maintained the original pace and continued to approach in silence. His whole body was rising, causing a strong psychological oppression. You dare not make a move. These simple words directly touched Qin Yu's heart. Although he teamed up with Su Shun and killed the previous 3 true saints, he knew in his heart that the City Lord's mansion was likely to be used by others, trying to muddy the water, or there were other purposes. Therefore, it was not a correct decision to completely fall out with them. It would only add a strong enemy for himself. When he first entered the desolate region, it was better to be safe. Before he figured out the situation and had no foundation, it was obviously an extremely stupid thing to wantonly make enemies. But even if this was the case, Qin Yu would not admit it. He believed that since the commotion here was too big, true Saint Baiyu would soon find out. Qin Yu had to control the situation and delay until he arrived. Then he would hand this mess over to true Saint Baiyu to deal with. And Chen Shangle in his hands was his only bargaining chip. So even though Qin Yu's heart was exposed, his voice was still cold and without the slightest bit of fluctuation. You can try. 5 words against 5 words. On the surface, they seemed to be evenly matched. Everyone was opposing each other. The chill in the depths of Su Shan's eyes became even colder. His feet still moved forward. The distance between him and Qin Yu was already less than 10 feet. Kacha! There was a light sound. It was Chen Shangle's neck bone. His heart almost burst open. Fear instantly broke through his calm and swept through his mind, causing him to subconsciously scream, "Uncle Su!" If a bone was broken, even if it was the most important part of the spine, it wasn't a serious injury for a cultivator. The crux of the matter was that the ice-cold hand that was grabbing onto his neck now contained a power that could destroy everything in its path. Once it erupted, when his neck was twisted, it was enough to instantly erase his soul and tear his body apart into countless pieces of broken bones and rotten flesh. Su Shin frowned and sighed inwardly. He had wandered between life and death countless times, and he believed that his eyes wouldn't be wrong. Although this black-robed man was strong, he didn't have any thoughts of risking his life. Since he wasn't willing to go all out, he naturally wouldn't dare to touch the young master. But now, Chen Shangle couldn't withstand the fear and instantly ruined his plan. If he continued forward, not to mention whether or not there would be any accidents, even if he successfully rescued Chen Shangle, he feared that deep in his heart there would be a bit of resentment. As a direct descendant of the City Lord, it was difficult to separate from the bloodline of the City Lord. Su Shin naturally didn't want to bury a huge hidden danger for his own future. With another step, Su Shun stopped and stared at the pair of faintly discernible eyes under the black robe. Let go of the young master. I will give you a chance to explain. Qin Yu thought, I'm not a 3-year-old child. Do you really think that just a few words can make me believe you? He shook his head and lightly said, This is not something you are qualified to decide. There was no deeper meaning in his words. He just wanted to delay for time and wait for true Saint Baiyu to return. This matter was caused by him, so he naturally had to resolve it. But it was obvious that Su Shun didn't think so. His eyebrows furrowed even tighter, and his eyes were filled with killing intent. If it weren't for today's matter involving Chen Shangle, he wouldn't have disregarded the life and death of the hostage and wanted to kill this person on the spot. Taking a deep breath, Su Shun was silent for several breaths of time. Then, he coldly said, Send a message to the mansion. Chapter 1471. Qin Shanglu was not only Qin Yuanshan's son, but also his only son. Although the two seemed to be the same, the meaning was completely different. As a man who had started his family in the wilderness, Qin Yuanshan had wandered around in his early years and risked his life in the border army. He had made great contributions, which was why he was chosen by the desolate emperor and had the respect and status he had today. This also led to Qin Yuanshan not getting close to women in his early years. His only son, Chun Shanglu, was also an accident. When he became powerful and his cultivation reached the true sage level, although he had many wives and concubines, it was not easy for him to have another child. As time passed, Qin Yuanshan only had one son, Chun Shanglu. In such a situation, the accident became a real treasure. And now, Qin Yuanshan's only son, the one he had high hopes for, had been kidnapped by an unknown criminal. Hearing his subordinates report, the fingers of the city lord trembled and some wine spilled out of his cup. He wiped it off calmly and said, "I understand. You may leave." He raised his cup and drank. Ever since true sage Baiyu entered the city lord residence, he had been suppressed by Chun Yuanshan's aura and felt very uncomfortable. At this moment, seeing Chun Yuanshan spilling the wine out of fear, she felt a bit delighted. Of course, she couldn't reveal even the slightest bit of this emotion. Moreover, she was extremely curious as to what had happened to actually make Chun Yuanshan, who never showed his emotions on the outside, lose his composure like this. Of course, if Qin Yuanshan didn't say anything, true sage Baiyu definitely wouldn't take the initiative to ask. He smiled as he drank his wine and continued the previous topic without any change in expression. After a few more vague exchanges about the situation in the imperial capital, Qin Yuanshan sighed. True Saint Baiyu immediately shut his mouth and smiled calmly. On the opposite side, Qin Yuanshan put down his wine cup with a light paw sound. His eyes revealed a bit of self-deprecation and helplessness. Nephew Baisu, Shang Lve has caused some trouble for a moment. I'm afraid this old man will have to excuse himself for the time being. I'll go over and take a look, lest I ruin your family's business if things get out of hand. True sage Baisu's heart skipped a beat, but he forced himself not to reveal a strange expression. Oh, which business is Uncle Chen talking about? Lunar Pavilion. Qin Yuanshan chuckled. Young people are so ridiculous. I don't know when they'll be able to restrain themselves. After all, he was his only son. For him to be able to maintain his composure at this moment, his self-restraint was already on point. How could he not be anxious? After saying this, Qin Yuanshan got up and walked out. True sage Baitu stood up and said, Uncle Chun, I'll go with you. I want to see who dares to go against Brother Shang, Lve. Qin Yuanshan only thought that he was expressing his attitude. After all, Chun Shanglu had met with an accident in the Lunar Inn. Since he was alarmed, it meant that the matter was not simple. With a thought, he smiled and nodded. Then, nephew, please come with me. The city lord had arrived. The crowd, who had already been shocked by the sudden change in the descending moon pavilion, could not help but stare even wider. It was to the extent that they were worried that if this continued, they would jump out with a paw sound and smash to the ground. No matter what, this matter wouldn't end so easily for the city lord to show himself. They were shocked and fearful, but at this time, they could not help but feel excited. Just who was it that dared to openly provoke the city lord's manor? Although the future of the city lord's manor seemed uncertain because of the storm caused by that matter, everyone knew that the city lord was His Majesty's trusted aide. As long as His Majesty's trust remained, no matter how big the storm was, it would be impossible to shake the ship that was the city lord's manor. Su Shin bowed. This subordinate is incompetent and has caused the young master to fall into a trap. I asked the city lord to punish me. Behind him, the city guards that had sealed off the descending moon pavilion all knelt on the ground. We greet the city lord. Their voices billowed, and their killing intent soared to the heavens at this moment. The city lord's power and status were fully displayed. In the vestibule and by the lake, those who were waiting for the situation to change, their eyes were suddenly filled with fear. Apprehension. Qin Yuanshan. There was no need for more. Just this name alone was enough to make it hard for half the people in the city to breathe. This was the status and influence that Chun Yuanshan had gradually established through his many years of managing Seawatch City. Qin Yu immediately felt how terrifying this power was. Chun Yuanshan's expression was calm, as if the one being controlled by others and about to be killed at any moment wasn't his only son. His icy cold eyes released a formidable oppression. After being locked onto by this person's eyes, although Chinyu knew that he wouldn't fear him in a contest of cultivation, his heart still trembled and a bit of awe rose in his heart. But beneath the black robes, Chinyu's expression remained calm. He slowly let out a breath and revealed a truly relaxed expression. This was because he saw true Saint Baiyu. This person had come together with Qin Yuanshan. This caused Chinyu to feel a bit strange. Could it be that the person he wanted to visit before was this Seawatch City's city lord? True Saint Baiyu groaned inwardly. Could this be considered a bad thing, coming true? When he heard that it was Descending Moon Pavilion, he had a foreboding premonition. And the results proved that his premonition was quite accurate. It really was the ruler of darkness. Just how long had it been? At most, it had been half a day. Moreover, he had already arranged everything. Wasn't it better to enjoy the warmth of a beauty in his arms? Why did he have to cause trouble? And why did he have to cause trouble for the city lord's mansion? Looking at Chun Shanglu, who was being held in Qin Yu's hands, true Saint Baiyu couldn't help but feel a headache coming on. At the same time, he felt a chill in his heart. He believed that the ruler of darkness wasn't an idiot. Why would he casually cause trouble in the desolate region? If that was the case, then this matter might not be so simple. Even if he didn't mention all this, Seawatch City was ranked among the 300 great cities of the Western Desolate. In addition, Qin Yuanshan was trusted by the Desolate Emperor and had a high status in the Western Desolate. Even several big shots in the court tried to rope him in. Of course, with his background, he naturally wasn't afraid. However, the relationship between the two sides had always been good, and there was no obvious conflict of interest. If someone dared to touch his only son, the matter wouldn't be easily settled. However, bringing the ruler of darkness to the imperial capital was his mission, and he couldn't allow any accidents to happen. This was a dilemma. He didn't want to offend the city lord's mansion, and he didn't want to provoke unknown trouble. He had to resolve this matter first. Thus, at this moment, true Saint Baiyu wasn't in a hurry to reveal his identity. Instead, he gave Chinyu a look. He wasn't sure whether or not the true Saint of Darkness could understand the meaning of this look. He couldn't help but feel a little nervous. In fact, Chinyu understood. He could see that true Saint Baiyu was in a difficult position. Of course, it was just difficult. He didn't seem panicked or frightened. This made Chinyu feel much more confident. He was even more interested in true Saint Baiyu's background. He didn't fear a city lord, and he only had a mere true saint cultivation. Cough, cough, fine. Mere wasn't the right word to use, but in reality, it wasn't too much. In short, he wouldn't be unlucky today. As his thoughts raced, Chinyu sneered and said, "True Saint Baiyu, you've finally returned." The son of Seawatch City's city lord, Chun Shanglu, allowed his subordinates to attack me. I suspect that this matter isn't simple. Now that I've taken him down, I'll leave the rest to you. However, you must give me an explanation for this matter. Beautiful. When true Saint Baiyu heard Chinyu call out his identity, he bitterly smiled in his heart. But soon, his smile turned into pleasant surprise. He thought that the Dark Ruler was indeed smart. In just a few words, he had managed to use the word reason. Moreover, his words also reminded him that since he dared to say this, he must have the confidence that he could pin down Chen Shanglu for injuring someone and not given the slightest chance to evade. Regardless of whether or not there was something strange about today's matter, just this point alone was enough to pull them out of trouble for the time being. Qin Yuanshan's eyes flashed, and he frowned. "Nephew Baiyu, do you know this person?" True Saint Baiyu bowed. "Uncle Chun, this is the Dark Ruler I mentioned. This just what is going on." This nephew is also confused. He turned around and said in a loud voice, "Sire Chief Sovereign of Darkness, no matter what happened, let go of Brother Shang LVE first. There must be a misunderstanding." Misunderstanding? Beneath the black robes, Qin Yu's voice was icy cold. "I actually think that this is a plot secretly planned by the City Lord Mansion." True Saint Baiyu's eyes jumped. He thought that Qin Yu really dared to say such words. He hurriedly gave Qin Yu a meaningful glance. I'm already here, so it's best if I stop while I'm ahead. If I really touch Chun Shanglu, then things will be far more troublesome. Dark Ruler, I guarantee you that there is absolutely no problem with the City Lord Mansion. Let him go first, and everything else can be discussed. Qin Yu hesitated for a moment. Then, he coldly coughed and withdrew. Qin Shanglu felt as if he had circled the gates of hell for a long time. Then, he immediately fled as if he had been granted amnesty. His face was filled with fear and dread. Father, Pa. A resounding slap cut off his words. Qin Yuanshan's face darkened and his eyes turned icy cold. Useless thing. All you know is how to do is flirt all day long. But you even got into a conflict with nephew by Yu's guest. Immediately scram back to the mansion and reflect on your mistakes. Without my permission, you are not allowed to take half a step out of your room. Chun Shanglu's eyes revealed a trace of fear. His lips moved, but he didn't dare to speak. He was protected by several good people from the City Lord Mansion, and soon left the sight of everyone. What a sharp mind. What a shrewd and ruthless way of handling things. In just several breaths of time, he had already guessed the general outline of what had happened. Then, with a few words, he had determined that today's matter was a case of jealousy in a brothel. If so, then even if the ruckus was a bit bigger and 3 true saints had perished, it would at most be ridiculously fierce, and their reputation would be tarnished. He didn't give anyone a chance to stir up a storm over this matter. And at the same time, he could also take this opportunity to see how all sides would react. If someone wasn't willing to accept this conclusion, then it must have something to do with today's events. True Saint Bayu secretly admired. He smiled and said, "Dark Ruler, let me introduce you. This is City Lord Chen Yuanshan of Sea Viewing City. He is one of my Western Wasteland's important ministers and is deeply trusted by His Majesty." This was an introduction and also a reminder. Qin Yu's eyes flashed. He cupped his hands together and said, "Greetings, City Lord." Chen Yuanshan smiled and said, "I've long heard of your great name. Today, I finally know that seeing is believing. Now that His Majesty has summoned you to the Western Wasteland, if you work hard, you'll surely have a bright future." After a pause, he cupped his hands together and said, "This misunderstanding is all because of my son's absurd actions. If he has offended you in any way, I ask that you forgive him. For a dignified city lord with his status, this could be said to be filled with sincerity." First, Qin Yuanshan had already sensed that there were many strange aspects to this matter. In addition to knowing Qin Yu's identity and the undercurrents in the imperial capital, he guessed that the City Lord Mansion had been used by someone else, and that Qin Shanglu had become someone else's raft. Since he had already been schemed against, he would have to take revenge in the future. But right now, he needed to reduce this matter into a small one and not give others a chance to act. Secondly, True Saint Bayu came from an imperial bloodline. Although he was from a remote branch family, his uncle was a truly brilliant individual. His future achievements would be hard to estimate, and His Majesty held him in high regard, so he naturally had to give him some face. Thirdly, there was Qin Yu's cultivation. When powerhouses interacted with auras, even if they hadn't truly fought, they could still make some judgments. This dark ruler in front of him was actually stronger than the rumors said. It was no wonder that his opponent's plan had failed. Toward the powerhouse, even if their future wasn't clear, it was still necessary to temporarily concede and respect them. True Saint Bayu sighed inwardly. This was the so-called lifting something heavy as if it were light, being able to pick it up and let it go. This was precisely what Qin Yuanshan was displaying right now. He didn't boast about his status. He didn't care about his face. Indeed, if his uncle thought highly of him, he naturally had his reasons. Ha ha ha, Dark Ruler, Uncle Qin's sincere apology should be enough for you to wipe away the discontent in your heart. How about we let this matter rest? Qin Yu let out a long breath. In his opinion, this was the best result, so he immediately nodded in agreement. But as he swept his eyes over True Saint Bayu's bright and smiling face, he couldn't help but sneer inwardly, a bit of anger in his heart. He wasn't going to be a free shield for you. Since I broke this trap for you today, you should at least give me an explanation. Chapter 1472. A strong start but a weak finish. This was probably the most appropriate description of the conflict at Descending Moon Hall. The audience that had been waiting to watch a good show was greatly disappointed. Of course, although they were disappointed, they didn't dare to reveal any emotions. One didn't need to be a genius to know that the entire City Lord Mansion was suppressing a fire. No one wanted to jump out and be the dead bird that had its head smashed in. After agreeing to be more intimate some other day, Qin Yuanshan smiled and cupped his hands together before leaving. Qin Yu looked at Qin Yuanshan's departing back and felt a sense of unease surge within him. There seemed to be something hidden in the City Lord's smile. As the City Lord Mansion's side left, the city guards also left. Soon, besides the messy scene, Descending Moon Hall was restored to tranquility. The losses were certainly not small, but True Saint Baitu didn't care. Not to mention how rich he was. The City Lord Mansion wouldn't make him pay for this. There would always be compensation afterwards. The most important thing right now was to figure out just what had happened. After waving away the panic-stricken temporary manager of Descending Moon Hall, True Saint Baitu pulled Qin Yu into a relatively intact courtyard. As for where the girls in the courtyard would go, that wasn't within his scope of consideration. Ruler of Darkness, tell me everything that happened today. There cannot be any omissions. Looking at True Saint Baitu across from him, Qin Yu sneered inwardly. He thought that this fellow wasn't an idiot. If True Saint Baitu dared to attack him, then he must have made some preparations. Things might not end here. The sooner he found out, the better. Without hiding anything, Qin Yu calmly recounted what had happened from beginning to end. True Saint Baitu's expression became increasingly solemn. His eyebrows furrowed and his face darkened. He looked at True Saint Baitu, looked at Qin Yu, looked at him again, and there was no response. Qin Yu sneered inwardly. He had spent a great deal of effort and taken a great risk to help True Saint Baitu block this matter. Did True Saint Baitu want to deny it? He lightly coughed and said, True Saint Baitu, don't you think you should give me an explanation for today's matter? Thoughts of extorting others, fine. Qin Yu had to admit that he did have them. After World Zero, he had become somewhat addicted to them, but now was different from the past. Qin Yu's thoughts leapt up a few times before he suppressed them, but at the very least, he could use this favor to exchange for some useful information from True Saint Baitu. As long as this fellow was prepared to continue being on good terms with him, he wouldn't refuse Qin Yu's proposal. Qin Yu was calm and unperturbed. He had already prepared himself to deal with True Sage Baitu. No matter what he said, even if he had a glib tongue, he had to come up with something solid to smooth out this matter. Free shield? That's impossible. Qin, did not open a charity hall. But soon, Qin Yu discovered that True Saint Baitu had a strange expression on his face. He looked at Qin Yu as if he wanted to say something but stopped himself. This left Qin Yu puzzled. What sort of rules were these? It was completely different from what he had imagined. Calm down and don't panic. I want to see what kind of tricks this True Saint Baitu can play. Finally, under Qin Yu's calm and confident gaze, True Saint Baitu opened his mouth and said with a bit of hesitation, Dark Ruler, you shouldn't be thinking that today's conflict at Descending Moon Hall was caused by me, right? Qin Yu was so angry he nearly laughed. What sort of nonsense was this? If it wasn't because of you, could it be because of me? That's impossible to frame. The two of us entered the Western Desolate together, and how long has it been since then? Could it be that I was wandering around somewhere else and ended up forming a grudge with someone? Qin Yu coldly sneered and didn't respond. But his meaning was clear. True Saint Baitu had a wonderful expression. There was anger and there was anger, but he didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He took a deep breath and waved his hand. At first I was thinking about where I should start and give you some reminders, but now it seems I can't delay any longer. I have to let you know just what sort of situation you are in right now. He reached out a hand and pointed at Qin Yu. Dark Ruler, please listen well. Today's matter was directed at you. This is absolutely true. So, the reason why my family's building has become like this is all thanks to you, of course. I was the one who chose this place, and I can consider myself unlucky. But I must make things clear. Qin Yu's eyes widened. Although he couldn't see his expression because of his black robes, It wasn't hard to sense that he was shaking from the bottom of his heart through his body language. Although this was only true Saint by Two's side of the story, Chinyu had a bad premonition as he looked at his expression and demeanor. He was clearly the one who had been implicated by true Saint by Two and suffered an undeserved calamity. So how did he suddenly become the protagonist of this story? True Saint by Two coldly sneered. Do you think that since you just entered the desolate region and haven't provoked any enemies, no one will come looking for you? But I'm sorry. What I want to tell you is that there are people in the Western Desolate who want you dead, and it isn't just one. And the worst news is that these people who want you dead all have extremely high status and strength. Even I don't want to provoke them. So, in other words, in my ignorant state, because I sent you into the Western Desolate, I have already been implicated in this trouble. As he spoke to hear, there was a hint of anger in his voice. He hadn't fully grasped this matter before. If he had known that the one who had chosen Chinyu was that person, then he would have never stepped into these muddy waters. This was the so-called beating a drowning dog. Such a good opportunity could be easily removed as long as he succeeded. This was a powerful competitor for the throne. One didn't need to be a genius to know that his cruel and merciless relatives wouldn't let him go. But it was clearly too late to say all of this now. True Saint by Two took a deep breath and suppressed the annoyance and anger in his heart. He looked at Chinyu and saw that although his complexion wasn't too good, he was still calm. His eyes flashed with a bit of surprise before they turned into faint appreciation. Ignoring everything else, the darkness ruler's courage and will were outstanding. Even after knowing that he was in such a dangerous situation, he was still able to remain calm. The room fell silent. Chinyu rubbed between his eyebrows and slowly said, "True Saint by Two, tell me everything you know. Consider it as me owing you a favor." This was the first formal transaction he had ever made. Since True Saint by Two had already started it, he shouldn't refuse. Of course, as for whether or not he would return the favor, that would depend on his mood. After all, this person was fake and the real darkness ruler had already died without a trace. If he wasn't satisfied, then he could look for someone else. True Saint by Two revealed a solemn expression. Good. He already had this intention to begin with. If it weren't for this, he wouldn't have stayed in the city lord mansion for so long. All of this was to obtain some information. Soon, Chinyu learned from True Saint by Two that there was an undercurrent surging in the Western Wasteland's capital. Unfortunately, this undercurrent had clearly affected him. The conflict in Descending Moon Hall seemed to have erupted suddenly, but it was actually a trap that had been laid down long ago, just waiting for him to jump into it. The true meaning of these words was that even if Chinyu didn't come to Descending Moon Hall today, or went somewhere else, there would still be other accidents occurring. This was because there were people who didn't want him to live. And if everything was as True Saint by Two said, there were indeed many people who wanted to kill him, and they were all terrifyingly strong. Chinyu took a deep breath and slowly said, "Li Ijo." As he was having a headache, he also felt his teeth hurt. He never imagined that all of this originated from someone else who had been miserably schemed against by him. Could this be the so-called cycle of cause and effect, retribution? The brief summary was as follows. Western Wasteland's Sixth Highness Li Ijo obtained the favor of the previous desolate sovereign. Thus, he arrived in the broken world and obtained the chance to control the ever-burning flame. He tried to use this to seize the ruler's lucky chance hidden within the world Zeroth. There was no need to elaborate on what happened after that. In short, Sixth Highness Li Ijo suffered a crushing defeat. After a series of twists and turns, he fled back to the Western Wasteland, where he fell into the dust and into the yellow mud. In normal circumstances, Li Ijo's mistakes should have been enough for him to be thrown into the abyss without a chance to rise again. But it was unknown what method this Sixth Highness used, but he managed to convince the previous desolate sovereign to speak up once more, giving him a chance to live. As for the specifics, True Saint by Two didn't elaborate. It was unknown whether it was because he had some misgivings or because he didn't understand much. Thus, the dark sovereign within the broken world was summoned and allowed to enter the Western Wasteland, becoming Li Ijo's last hope. but many people hoped that Li Ijo would fall and never have a chance to rise again. And the method to achieve this goal was simple: to kill the Dark Sovereign. Thus, our high-class trash student Qin Yu was innocently implicated. He had clearly just stepped into the desolate region, but he was already surrounded by countless icy cold eyes that wished to tear him to pieces. It was unknown who the enemies were, but a simple count could tell that there were several of the most famous princes and princesses of the current desolate sovereign, as well as their supporters. According to True Saint Baitu's words, the big shots of the court wouldn't take their positions ahead of time, so the situation shouldn't be too terrifying. But no one could guarantee that these big shots weren't secretly plotting against each other. For instance, the plot at Descending Moon Hall seemed incomparably simple, but they had actually used a spy buried within the City Lord Mansion and even had 2 other true saints joining in at the last minute. All of this had been carried out in secret without alarming the City Lord Mansion in the least. This alone was enough to prove that there were great figures personally covering up the situation. Otherwise, did they really think that Seawatch City's Emperor Qin Yuanshan was someone to be trifled with? It was only now that Qin Yu truly understood why the City Lord had decided to reduce this matter to a small one from the very beginning, and why he had labeled it as a fight over a woman's affections. He had even shamelessly slapped Chun Shanglu in the face, sending him back to his mansion to reflect on his mistakes. This was clearly a safe self-preservation move. Before the situation was clear, he had jumped out of the muddy waters to avoid becoming a spear in the hands of others. As he thought of this, he thought of how the City Lord had smiled warmly and calmly before leaving. Qin Yu couldn't help but grit his teeth and curse. That old bastard! It was clear that Qin Yuanshan had already seen through everything and was just waiting to see Qin Yu suffer. After all, it was hard to guard against a hidden arrow. In addition, it was those people who attacked him. Even if he could avoid today's calamity, how could he escape unscathed every time? Qin Yu suddenly reacted. The City Lord's swift and decisive actions, the City Lord's sincere smile, all of this was because he knew that Qin Yu was about to die. To bicker with someone who was about to die and possibly cause trouble for himself, this was naturally not a worthwhile matter. Chapter 1473. True Saint Baiyu's lips twitched. Although I can empathize with Dark Ruler's current mood, the solemn Seawatch City Lord is someone that even I don't want to provoke. So, it's best if you show some respect in your words. Beneath the black robes, Qin Yu's face was dark and gloomy. He simply ignored True Saint Baiyu's reminder. No matter what happened today, it was an indisputable fact that his son had run up to him to cause trouble. How could he not curse at him? His thoughts raced. Qin Yu took a deep breath and said, "True Saint Baiyu, I'll leave everything to you." True Saint Baiyu's expression froze. His eyes widened, and he quietly looked at Qin Yu for a long time. Then, he sighed and said, "Dark Ruler, are you certain you can eat me alive?" Of course, this was a relatively tactful way of saying this. What Baiyu truly wanted to say was that the world was so difficult, so just how thick was one's skin? Qin Yu was expressionless, pretending as if he didn't hear True Saint Baiyu's taunts. In the Western wilderness, he was nothing more than a rootless duckweed. He naturally had to grab on a True Saint Baiyu. Otherwise, did he really think he could rely on his own strength to fight against all the powerful enemies around him? Stop messing around. So, he remained silent. Beneath the black robes, his calm eyes met True Saint Baiyu's, clearly expressing his thoughts. What you said was right. True Saint Baiyu was secretly annoyed, but he discovered that in the current situation, there was nothing he could do about Qin Yu. It was easy to escape from his quagmire, but if something happened to Qin Yu, humph, did you really think that the old man who moved out the imperial palace was so old that he didn't have any strength left? Don't forget, the reason why the Sixth Highness was able to obtain opportunities again and again was all because of the previous desolate emperor. And within the emperor clans, filial piety was something that was rare, especially in the family sitting on the chair. This in itself proved that the old man still had considerable authority in the internal affairs of the Western wilderness. Even His Majesty needed to make concessions and tolerate him. If Qin Yu died, the Sixth Highness would be beyond redemption. Would he be any better off? It had to be known that if the old man had an opinion, someone would still die. Thus, true Saint Baiyu helplessly discovered that what he said just now was the truth. Qin Yu had eaten him alive. But at this time, as Qin Yu looked at true Saint Baiyu's face and saw his emotions fluctuate, he let out a sigh of relief. Although he had already made a prediction before he spoke, he was now truly certain that everything was as he had expected. As long as they could capture true Saint Baiyu, their safety should not be a problem for the time being. As for what would happen in the future, they would have to wait until they survived until then. This was indeed an extremely pessimistic and gloomy thought, but the F*King reality made people unable to see any hope at all. True Saint Baiyu took a deep breath and exhaled heavily. His face was full of melancholy as he said slowly, "I have to admit that I can't let anything happen to you now. However, the implications of this matter are too great. I have to protect your life, but I can't cause too much trouble. Otherwise, it will be very troublesome. Therefore, I can't take the initiative to protect them. I can only borrow their strength to achieve my goal." Qin Yu said, "Get to the point." Although Xiao Chun was certain that he could capture true Sage Baitu now, when he thought of the unknown dark future, he did not feel good. In this sort of emotional state, Qin Yu naturally wasn't in the mood to listen to his long speech. True Saint Baiyu choked on his breath and nearly rolled his eyes. He clenched his teeth and said, "We will stay in Sea-Watch City for one more day. The day after tomorrow, an elder of my family will be returning to the imperial capital. I will ask him to take a detour and bring us along." This was the best method that true Saint Baiyu could think of right now. Even if his thoughts were seen through, no one could say anything. In the end, he was only trying to protect himself because he had no other choice. Beneath the black robes, Qin Yu frowned. Stay for one more day? They had only been here for a short half a day, and yet such a great storm had been stirred up. The smile of that old thing from the City Lord Mansion was still vivid in his mind. Who knew what would happen if they continued to stay here? Don't worry. Since Qin Yuanshan has sensed danger, no matter what, he will not allow it to happen a second time. Otherwise, his ability to control Sea-Watch City will be questioned by all sides. In this sort of situation, he won't give anyone a chance to attack him again. Although Qin Yu didn't know what true Saint Baiyu was talking about, he could feel his confidence from his tone. He didn't say anything else. Reality proved that true Saint Baiyu was wrong. For the following day, Sea-Watch City was incomparably quiet without any accidents occurring. As for the messy Lunar Inn, after an emergency tidying up and repairing, it had also recovered some of its former tranquility. Even the lake that had almost dried up after being smashed was now rippling with water once again. Originally, he thought that the silence would continue until the elder that true Saint Baiyu spoke of arrived, but suddenly there was a knock on the door. Qin Yu frowned for a moment before composing himself. He picked up a teacup and took a sip, as if he hadn't heard anything. Outside the courtyard, the knocking continued for a long time before it quieted down. But before Qin Yu could finish drinking the tea in his cup, the knocking started again. This time, it was even more urgent than before, as if there was a hint of panic in it. Qin Yu revealed a helpless look. He thought for a moment and put down the teacup. He shouted, "Let her in." The courtyard door opened, and the sound of footsteps approached from afar. Miss Yin hurriedly walked in. It had only been a day, but she was like a withered flower in autumn. Her pale face and slightly cracked lips gave off a delicate feeling that she was in a sorry state. Seeing Qin Yu and meeting his indifferent gaze, Miss Yin gasped for breath. Then she fell to her knees. "Sir, I know that you are already magnanimous to not pursue my responsibility. I really shouldn't ask for anything more, but I really have no other choice." Tears fell down her cheeks like pearls from a broken necklace. Miss Yin fell to her knees. "I beg you to save Dai. She is about to die." Before knocking on the courtyard door, Yin Qing had already tried every method she could think of. But those that were close to her and tried to curry favor with her were now all avoiding her, as if she were infected with a plague. In fact, in the current ascending moon hall, her situation was even more miserable. The noble young master of the City Lord Mansion had been slapped in front of everyone. It could be said that he had lost all face. Although none of this had anything to do with Yun Qing, there was no reason to vent his anger on her. If Chun Shangolv bore a grudge against her, could Yun Qing's fate be imagined? Now, anyone that had anything to do with her wished they could cleanly sever all ties with her, much less help her save someone. It was good that that girl died. It would be best if Yun Qing died together with her, so that she wouldn't continue to be a disaster magnet. Qin Yu furrowed his eyebrows. He guessed that Dai, or might be the girl that Chen Shangolv had kicked. He glanced at Yin Qing. He really couldn't understand why this woman dared to come here and ask him to help her save someone. Miss Yin didn't look up, but she seemed to feel the surprise and confusion in the eyes that fell on her. In fact, she also didn't know why she had requested to come here. Strictly speaking, the relationship between her and Qin Yu was only a friendship that had lasted for a meal. It was just a little better than that of strangers. The room was completely silent. Lying on the ground, Miss Yun's face had turned increasingly pale. Although she was a lady from a brothel, she was usually chaste and praised. How could she have imagined that she would fall to such a state in a single day? Despair filled her eyes. She wiped away her tears and struggled to stand up. She bowed to Qin Yu and turned to leave. At this moment, Qin Yu could see the will to die in her eyes. It seemed that this Miss Red of Ascending Moon Hall had already decided to commit suicide. Looking at this face that was exactly the same as Liao Shi's, as well as the sorrow and despair that appeared on her face, Qin Yu didn't know why, but he suddenly felt something stir in his heart. As she turned to leave, he shook his head and sighed. Where is she? Miss Yin was stunned for a moment before she responded. She turned around, her eyes shining with light. She looked at Qin Yu, tears tumbling down her cheeks. Dai Er's injuries were extremely heavy. Without timely medical treatment, she was now in a near-death state. But to Qin Yu, this wasn't a serious matter. He waved his hand and summoned darkness that covered her from head to toe. After several breaths of time, Qin Yu turned and left. The darkness retreated to reveal Dai Er. Although her complexion was still pale, her breathing had calmed down. Her eyelashes fluttered, and she slowly opened her eyes. Miss Yin held her in her arms. She looked up at Qin Yu's back. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. The several terrified maids beside her couldn't help but cry as their hearts surged with emotions. As Qin Yu walked out of the dilapidated courtyard, he heard the cries coming from behind him. He shook his head, a self-deprecating look on his face. He thought that although he seemed kind, he was actually a heartless person. So what if he saved that girl today? If they offended the City Lord Mansion, who knew what sort of fate awaited them in the future? So, living on wasn't necessarily a good thing. Qin Yu shook his head, suppressing these tumbling thoughts. He was in a precarious situation right now, and he didn't know what sort of situation he would end up in the future. How could he have the qualifications to care about others? He stepped away, leaving behind the cries behind him. He returned to the courtyard and waited for True Saint Bayu's message. He estimated that it was about time. In fact, at the same time, True Saint Bayu was respectfully speaking with an old man with white hair and beard. Although this person was old, his eyes were bright and spirited. He emitted an astonishing aura that left one in awe. Bayu, the current situation is urgent. Continuing to be entangled in it is not a good choice. The white-haired old man glanced at him. Why not choose the second path? I can ask the Lord to step forward. I believe that old man will give us some face. True Saint Bayu forced a smile. He respectfully said, Uncle Zhang's words are reasonable, but how can the matters of this world be explained clearly? After all, you know that old man style in the past. If I cause Sixth Highness to fall into depravity, this matter can be serious or small. Jiang Chengzi furrowed his eyebrows and nodded. Your considerations are reasonable, but looking at your complexion, it seems there is another reason for this. True Saint Bayu bowed. I don't dare to hide anything from Uncle Jiang. The other reason I asked you to come here and bring me and the ruler of darkness into the imperial capital is because I have a high opinion of this person. Jiang Chengzi tapped his fingers on the table. After several breaths of silence, he said, "Your uncle once praised your judgment. I hope he wasn't wrong this time." True Saint Baiyu revealed a guilty expression. "I'll have to trouble Uncle Jiang." Jiang Chengzi smiled. "It's no problem. I think my old face can scare some people away." He waved his hand. "Go. After you make some preparations, we will immediately leave." "Yes." True Saint Baiyu bowed and left. After he left, a cultivator hurried to his side and whispered a few words to him. Hearing this person's words, True Saint Baiyu's lips twitched. He revealed a strange expression. This ruler of darkness fellow's courage wasn't ordinary. At this time, he still had the heart to show tender and protective feelings towards women. Could he really be a virgin? Was his heart moved by a woman he had just met? From his own point of view, if it weren't for this, True Saint Baiyu really couldn't understand why Qin Yu would do something so superfluous. He was actually such a passionate person. His eyes flashed. True Saint Baiyu lowered his voice and whispered some instructions into this person's ear. After this person hurried away, he sighed. When he said that he had a high opinion of the ruler of darkness, this was indeed what he was thinking. Although he hadn't had much contact with this person, he didn't know why, but he always felt an inexplicable closeness to this person. There was even a faint impulse to make friends with him. If it weren't for this, with True Saint Baiyu's status and background, how could he have taken the initiative to show goodwill to Qin Yu? Since he wanted to be on good terms with Qin Yu, there was no harm in giving him a favor. Thinking about it, he would be satisfied with this arrangement. Then he wouldn't tell him for now. After all, a pleasant surprise had to appear at the right time for it to be perfect. He knocked on Qin Yu's courtyard door. True Saint Baiyu directly said, "My clan's elders have arrived." Qin Yu said, "Let's go." The two of them left Descending Moon Hall. The group had already been organized. Over 100 knights sat atop their war horses, silent and somber. With just a glance, Qin Yu could feel the endless scent of blood and slaughter from these knights. He couldn't help but feel a chill in his heart. He looked at the black carriage at the very front of the group, a dignified expression on his face. True Saint Baiyu quietly explained, "This elder of my clan comes from the army." He didn't say anything more, but there was a bit of pride in his eyes. Seeing that True Saint Baiyu didn't step forward to introduce him, Qin Yu thought for a moment. He cupped his hands together towards the black carriage, expressing his thanks. Now, he had inexplicably gained many powerful enemies and was in dire need of friends. As for True Saint Baiyu and the influence behind him, no matter how he looked at it, they were Qin Yu's best choice. Because of this, he didn't mind taking the initiative to show goodwill. But unfortunately, the master of the carriage didn't seem to care about any of this. He only lightly said, "Let's go." The black carriage rumbled and moved forward first. Following it were over 100 grim knights, and behind them were over a dozen carriages. The procession formed a long line. True Saint Baiyu patted Qin Yu's shoulder. With a glance, the two of them flew into one of the carriages. Sitting down on a comfortable cushion, True Saint Baiyu let out a deep breath. "All right, there shouldn't be any problems in terms of safety now." Qin Yu's eyes flashed. It seemed that the master of the carriage was extraordinary. To him, this was naturally a good thing. But as he thought about how even someone of True Saint Baiyu's status had to find such a powerful person to escort him into the imperial capital, Qin Yu suddenly felt that his actions of entering the imperial capital were no different from a sheep walking into a tiger's den. He was simply seeking his own death. Pa. Stop. I won't die. I definitely won't. Chapter 1474. The journey was incomparably smooth. They arrived at the transmission array of Sea Viewing City. This place had obviously been notified and had been cleared ahead of time. In the eyes of countless awe and indignation, the black carriage was the first to enter the transmission array, followed by a knight riding a warhorse. Standing on the ground, The giant transmission array connected to the imperial capital was like a bottomless vortex, swallowing everyone inside. In the carriage, Qin Yu frowned slightly. He turned his head and looked somewhere behind him. "It's Su Shan," True Saint Baiyu lazily said. After entering the carriage, he appeared extremely relaxed. This person is Chun Yuanshan's deputy general. He already had peak true divine strength a few years ago, and it is rumored that he isn't far from breaking through. He is a fierce character. After a pause, his eyes swept over the black robe, and he continued. This person's only shortcoming is that he is narrow-minded and will always take revenge for his grievances. In Descending Moon Hall, you made him lose face. With Su Shan's temperament, he will naturally bear a grudge. Qin Yu frowned. He lightly said, "Thank you for reminding me. Now I have one more enemy." Although he said this, he didn't worry too much. As the saying goes, when there are too many lice, there won't be an itch thinking about the enemies Qin Yu already had. What did it matter if there was one more Su Shan? True Saint Baiyu faintly smiled. Looking at the dark ruler under the black robe, he felt that this person was more and more humorous and was a calm and composed character. For him, this was an extremely difficult hurdle to overcome. But if he could smoothly pass it, it also represented his formidable ability, and he would naturally be favored by others. At that time, there would be many people willing to extend an olive branch to the dark ruler. But sending charcoal on a snowy day was far better than adding flowers to a brocade. And what he was doing now was the job of sending charcoal. Thinking of this, True Saint Baiyu's eyes vaguely swept over a carriage behind him, a smug smile on his face. Su Shan's eyes were gloomy. He coldly snorted. "Dark ruler, in Descending Moon Hall, you may have won, but between you and me, it is not yet time to determine victory or defeat." He turned and lightly said, "Reporting to the city lord, the Western Border Army has already left. The security in the city can be temporarily suspended." "Yes, Deputy General." After receiving the order, several city guards soared into the sky and hurried away. Western Border, Imperial Capital. As the heart of the empire, the Imperial Capital was not just a megacity. To be precise, it was made up of 3 parts: the capital region, the Imperial City, and the Imperial Palace hidden behind layers of powerful defenses. All the teleportation portals connected to the Imperial Capital were built at the edge of the capital region. Legend had it that apart from the few teleportation portals built in the depths of the Imperial Palace, no one was allowed to build teleportation portals in the entire Imperial Capital. Anyone who disobeyed would be treated as a traitor. This was naturally to ensure the safety of the Imperial Capital. Even if the world were to change, no one would be able to directly descend into the Imperial Capital. As one of the most famous cities in the desolate region, it received countless people and resources every day. As a result, the number of teleportation gates at the border of the capital region was one of the largest in the entire wasteland. Not only were they huge, but they also had a shocking capacity. Resplendent rays of light shot into the sky, which meant that someone had arrived at this megacity or left reluctantly. It was not easy to live in the Imperial Capital, but even so, as the most bustling city in the desolate region, this was still the dream of countless people. It represented endless good fortune and good fortune. Perhaps it was just a turning point, but it could help someone leap up and achieve something that others envied. Sitting in the carriage, the entire teleportation process was incomparably smooth. It was only when the wheels began to roll that Qin Yu discovered that he had arrived outside this megacity. Across from him, True Saint Baiyu had his eyes closed in meditation. He suddenly opened his eyes, a smile on his face. "I've finally returned." There was a hint of unconcealable excitement in his words. Qin Yu reached out and opened the carriage window. He looked out. From far away, he could see the towering city that lay on the earth like a great beast. At this time, 9 suns hung high in the sky. But when facing this great city, it gave off a feeling as if all light was blocked out. Dignified, solemn, boundless momentum, as if it could swallow the heavens and chase after the sun, ruling over all things in the world. Qin Yu's eyes were dazed for a moment. It was only after a long time that he took a deep breath and suppressed the shaking in his heart. True Saint Bayou smiled. The imperial capital is the #1 city of my western desolate region. Even in the entire desolate region, besides the founding emperor city of the central desolate region, it can be said to be one of the best. There was a bit of pride in his words. Qin Yu slowly nodded. It is indeed the most magnificent city I have ever seen in my life. But True Saint Bayou would never have imagined that Qin Yu, whose voice was filled with awe and emotion, would actually be thinking about what method he could use to overthrow and defeat this city. With Qin Yu's current cultivation, it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that he was bold enough to have such thoughts. But to dare to think about it, just this point was enough to surpass ordinary cultivators by countless times. Of course, one could also understand that Qin Yu's ability to seek death had reached the peak. In order to conceal his true emotions, or perhaps it could be said that he was using a distraction method to alleviate the great fear deep in his heart. Qin Yu took a deep breath and slowly said, True Saint Bayou, there is something I would like to ask you. True Saint Bayou shifted his body, changing into a more comfortable position. Speak, Qin Yu said, after entering the Western Desolate, and even arriving at the imperial capital today, I have discovered that in this vast territory, there are a massive number of ordinary people everywhere. Why is this? This question had lingered in his mind for a long time. True Saint Bayou smiled. Ah, that's right. When you were in the broken world, it was difficult to see ordinary people coexisting with cultivators. But that is because the broken world is in a special state of existence, and because your cultivation level is relatively low. While this matter is a bit complicated, but in summary, the reason is simple. The reason why ordinary people exist is so that more and more cultivators can be born. Hearing this, Qin Yu suddenly reacted. His rise had been too fast, so he didn't understand too much about the common sense of the high-level cultivators. For instance, children. True Saint Bayou looked at him. You've realized? As a cultivator's boundary rose, they would gradually transform their life force. But as they became stronger and stronger, wanting to give birth to future generations became increasingly difficult. This was similar to those creatures that were born with incomparably powerful bloodlines. As long as they were able to smoothly give birth to future generations, they would possess astonishing strength. But for them, if they wanted to smoothly give birth to a future generation, they would need to spend countless nights of hard work. Qin Yu's lips twitched. If he wanted to explain, then explain. Why did he have to be so ridiculous? Just as he was deep in thought, he nearly broke his back. Strictly speaking, this was because the vast majority of cultivators in this world, no matter how high or low their cultivation was, all of them cultivated from a weak and small state. Only when there was a sufficiently large population of living beings could more cultivators be born. Then, the outstanding ones would soar into the heavens and maintain the current cultivation world. If there were no ordinary living beings as a foundation, then the seemingly prosperous and powerful world of cultivators would be like an ancient tree that had its roots cut off. Although it seemed incomparably lush, once it exhausted all the water in its body, it would eventually wither away. However, Qin Yu's eyes flashed. Regarding this matter, although what True Saint Bayou said was correct, it wasn't comprehensive. Before this, Qin Yu hadn't noticed this. But now that he had entered the capital region and could see the imperial capital's walls from afar, he vaguely discovered a secret: faith, or the power of incense. That's right, it was similar to the divine kingdom that Qin Yu had seized from the chicken overlord. He could gather the faith of believers and gradually strengthen himself. And the Western Desolation, if one were to use a simple and crude description, could be regarded as a supersized divine kingdom. At this moment, Qin Yu's heart was filled with shock. Emotions surged in his chest. After he seized the divine kingdom, he had felt how amazing it was and faintly felt that it wasn't on a level that ordinary cultivators could come into contact with. But no matter what, Qin Yu never imagined that it would eventually evolve into such an astonishing form. That's right, Qin Yu's intuition told him that his guess was correct. The Western Desolation was indeed a supersized divine kingdom. But it was clear that in order to complete this sort of advancement and transformation, there would inevitably be countless twists and turns, a process that would require one to overcome all sorts of difficulties. But this discovery caused Qin Yu's heart to be shaken and shocked, and at the same time, he felt a bit more confident. So what if it was the Western Desolation? It was nothing more than a supersized divine kingdom. Qin Yu also had one. Putting aside the disparity in strength between them, there was no difference in essence. If he thought about it like this, then it didn't seem so terrifying. Qin Yu's thoughts raced. Little by little, he suppressed the endless shock in his heart. He glanced at the chicken overlord from the corner of his eyes. After entering the Western Desolation, it had become particularly quiet. It seemed that once things calmed down a bit, he would have to have a good chat with it about matters related to the divine kingdom. Just what had that old white ape that had died taught it? Perhaps some seemingly unremarkable omissions contained crucial information. True Saint Baitu revealed a surprised expression. He looked at the dark ruler, who was clearly lost in thought. He thought that this was a very simple matter, so why was he so lost in thought? It was probably because after seeing the imperial capital, his heart was shaken. He had barely managed to maintain his calm just now. But after a moment of distraction, he still couldn't help but fall into a state of shock that he couldn't extricate himself from. He could understand. He could really understand. True Saint Baitu didn't have the least bit of ridicule in his heart. Thinking about an ant that had suddenly developed its spiritual wisdom and looked up at a human city, this was similar to the shock Qin Yu felt in his heart. Of course, with Qin Yu's current Dark Ruler state and the strength he possessed, calling him an ant wasn't appropriate. But if one viewed the Western Desolation as a single entity, then in front of the terrifying strength contained within the imperial capital that was its heart, Qin Yu could at most be considered a relatively powerful ant. This wasn't excessive at all. Chapter 1475. Ahem. True Saint Baiyu said solemnly, the Western Desolation is indeed incomparably powerful, but a ruler can also become a hegemon. For example, Chun Yuan Shun, who you and I met before, was able to become the lord of Guanhai City even though he was only at the level of a weak ruler. Thus, ruler of darkness, all you need is an opportunity before you can rise to the top. Although mental strength didn't seem obvious, it was actually extremely important and involved many aspects. Once one lost their drive, it would be extremely difficult for them to advance. Since he had decided to befriend Qin Yu, True Saint Baiyu naturally didn't want to see his efforts go to waste. Under the black robe, Qin Yu glanced at him. When he saw the concern on True Saint Baiyu's face, he couldn't help but feel a little guilty. After all, if True Saint Baiyu knew what he was thinking, he would probably jump up on the spot and be the first to chop him into pieces. Thank you for your reminder, True Saint Baiyu. The carriage fell into silence. True Saint Baiyu thought about it and didn't say anything else. He had already reminded Qin Yu. Whether or not Qin Yu could successfully break free and stabilize his mind depended on himself. There is an extremely vast region between the Jiangyi region and the northern wilderness. The reason why they could see the northern wilderness city walls was because it was large enough. Without a teleportation gate and with the strict forbidden space array, the group could only advance along the wide road. After leaving Guanhai City and successfully entering the northern wilderness, True Saint Baiyu's relaxed attitude infected Qin Yu, and he thought that the danger had passed. However, at this moment, something unexpected happened. The carriage suddenly stopped. Qin Yu looked up, and a bright light exploded in his eyes. On the other side, True Saint Baiyu frowned as he stared ahead with anger in his eyes. Something happened. True Saint Baiyu took a deep breath and said, "We will stay here and not show ourselves." The border army had Uncle Jiang personally leading them, but they still didn't give up. This matter was more dangerous and troublesome than they had imagined. At this moment, The reason why they didn't show themselves was because those who had the qualifications and courage to block the border army's path were definitely not ordinary. At a time like this, it was obviously a better choice to be a coward. At this moment, on the wide road leading to the northern wilderness, a person sat in the middle. There was a square table beside the chair. The table and chair were all blood red. It was the same as the robe he was wearing. The war horses that the knights rode on seemed to have smelled something terrifying at this moment, as they kicked restlessly. The eyes that were revealed under the visor stared at the blood-robed tea drinker who was sitting calmly in the round chair. Even though he remained silent, he subconsciously revealed deep respect. The blood-robed tea drinker smiled and said, "Jiang Chengzi, it's been a long time since I last saw you. You should at least show yourself and say hello." There was a moment of silence in the black carriage. Then, the door was pushed open from the inside. Jiang Chengzi, who had white hair and beard and was still as majestic as ever, slowly walked out wearing armor. A knight beside the carriage fell off his horse and knelt on the ground. Jiang Chengzi looked straight ahead as he stepped down. "Blood Flag, it has indeed been a long time. I didn't expect you to still be alive." Inside the circular chair, Blood Flag, who had withdrawn from the border army for many years, suddenly began to laugh loudly. His voice continuously reverberated through the air, startling the war horses into continuously backing up. The knights did everything they could to calm him down, and their eyes all revealed expressions of shock. Oomph! A cold snort sounded like thunder exploding on the ground. It suddenly swept into everyone's ears and swept away the impact of the laughter. Jiang Chengzi narrowed his eyes and said coldly, "They're just some juniors in the army. Why make things difficult for them? If anything happens, I will take responsibility." Blood Flag restrained his laughter, but the corners of his mouth were still slightly hooked up. On the surface, he looked like a rather handsome young man, but his face was pale. The most eye-catching part was his dark red lips, as if he had just drunk blood. There are countless generals in the Western Border Army, but only a few of them are worthy of my attention. Jiang Chengzi, you are one of them. That is why I will give you some face. Hand over the people in the carriage who do not belong to the Border Army, and I will leave immediately. I will not make things difficult for you." The deeper meaning was that if he did not hand over the people, then don't blame him for being ruthless. A single person dared to make such a declaration in front of hundreds of slaughtering knights who had rushed out from piles of corpses, as well as the border army, General Jiang Chengzi. This alone was enough to show how arrogant this person was. The air was completely silent. Including Jiang Chengzi, everyone remained silent. This meant that Blood Flag indeed had the qualifications to be arrogant. He had the qualifications to be arrogant, and he alone could threaten everyone on the other side. Trouble. Jiang Chengzi sighed in his heart. He originally thought that with the prestige of the Western Border Army in his old face, he would be able to temporarily suppress this matter. As long as they entered the capital and handed over the Master of Darkness, this matter would no longer have anything to do with them. But who would have thought that the Blood Flag would suddenly appear and block their path? If it was someone else, Jiang Chengzi would not hesitate to order his subordinates to charge forward and kill the person who blocked their path on the spot. He would not be afraid of any criticism or investigation afterwards. This was the tyrannical confidence that was built up from the glorious achievements of the border armies since the establishment of the Western Wilderness and the blood of countless comrades. But the person in front of them was Blood Flag, a person who had left the Western Border Army for many years, but was still a flag and even a legendary figure. He was evil, cruel, and ruthless. He was a demon that everyone feared, but he had also made countless contributions. Within the Western Border Army, he was one of the most famous figures. Facing him, the most outstanding soldiers in the army had already lost their courage and drive. Of course, taking a step back, even if the elites under his command still had the strength to fight, Jiang Chengzi was not willing to let them die here. They were all elites who had fought against the Western Border barbarians and walked out of mountains of corpses and seas of blood. They were summoned to the capital to receive their rewards. The knives and axes of the barbarians did not kill them. So how could Jiang Chengzi allow their blood to be spilled on the land outside the capital? But if it was just him alone, it was important to know one's own limits, and Jiang Chengzi was one. He could not block Blood Flag. Even if he used all his strength, he would soon be defeated. Taking a deep breath, Jiang Chengzi's eyes gradually brightened. At this moment, his white hair moved without any wind, and his burly body and armor released the aura of a general that could swallow the heavens and chase the sun. In the carriage behind, a low voice suddenly sounded in true divine by Yu's ears. "Take him away. Enter the capital as fast as possible. If you can't, put your own safety first." Swoosh! True divine by Yu's expression changed. Daring to block the border army's path was already a terrifying thing to think about. But now, he was sure that he had still underestimated the terror of the person blocking the road. "Let's go." He grabbed Qin Yu and smashed the door of the carriage. The two of them were like arrows released from a bow, whistling through the air as they shot towards the capital. Chapter 1476. Blood Flag narrowed his eyes, his expression still light as he said, "Jiang Qingzi, the you today are a bit disappointing." Across from him, Jiang Qingzi stood there in his armor. His aura rose around him, as if he were a god descending from the heavens. "Blood Flag, even with your status, you still need to consider the consequences of trying to kill a conferred border army troop in the capital region." Blood Flag's lips curved up in a mocking smile. "It seems that I've left the border army for far too long, so much so that you have a vague impression of me. If I didn't dare to attack you, would I have appeared here?" As he spoke the last word, he stepped forwards. The chairs around him, including the tea set, were instantly shattered by a powerful strength, turning into a tumbling fog of blood. A mournful wail sounded out, emitting the endless despair and pain of a life before death. It was enough to make one's hair stand on end. Ruthless killing intent was like a long river that had burst its banks, roaring and sweeping in all directions with a rumbling sound. But when it was less than 100 feet away, it was twisted by an invisible strength. It gathered together and fused together with the blood fog, turning into a giant blood saber that slashed down. There was no sound as it broke through the air. This was because beneath this saber, the concept of space had been lost. It appeared it cut down. It was already right in front of them. Jiang Chengzi's pupil shrank. With a loud shout, he punched out. His metal-covered fist collided with the blood-red saber. In the next moment, with a heaven-shaking explosion, it was like a bolt of thunder had exploded, forming a terrifying shockwave visible to the naked eye. It swept outwards in a ring shape, instantly destroying the incomparably hard and broad road. Wherever it went, dust would rise into the skies. Facing Blood Flag's slash, the old general didn't fall into a disadvantage. At least on the surface, he was still awe-inspiring and awe-inspiring, like a heavenly god descending to the mortal world. But at this time, Jiang Chengzi's complexion changed, revealing a look of anger. "You actually succeeded. Bye, run." His shout was supported by his powerful cultivation. It instantly drilled into the ears of true Saint Bayu, who was pulling Qin Yu and shooting towards the imperial capital. His complexion paled. With his status, he naturally knew of Blood Flag's ominous reputation. It was because of this that he felt even more terrified. This was because he was a madman. Once he went crazy, he was a terrifying character without any scruples. It was precisely because of this that Blood Flag was transferred back from the border army and suppressed in the imperial capital to sharpen its temperament. If it wasn't for that, he would have already become one of the new giants in the Empire's military and a real big shot in the West Wilderness. Therefore, before he escaped, Jiang Qingzi reminded him to prioritize his own safety. He must have predicted this moment. Right at this moment, a huge force suddenly exploded and forcefully pulled True Sage Bai Su to a stop. Bai Su, who was filled with shock and anger, desperately trying to rush into the imperial capital, felt the soreness in his bones as they groaned. His face immediately turned green. He angrily glared at Chinyu. Just as he was about to ask him what he wanted to do, his body trembled in the next moment, and endless anger filled his eyes. A blood-red vortex suddenly appeared in the direction the two of them were heading. As it rotated, it looked like a bloody mouth. From this whirlpool, True Sage by 2 could feel a cold and violent killing intent. At this moment, his hair stood on end. If it weren't for Chinyu sensing something and forcefully stopping them, they feared they would have already drilled in. Although he didn't know what this vortex was, he didn't need to be a genius to know that once they were swallowed in, the consequences wouldn't be good. Although he already knew that Blood Flag was a madman, when he truly determined that Blood Flag didn't hesitate to try and kill him, True Sage by 2 still felt a terrible feeling. It was like a bucket of ice water had been poured over his head, causing his bones to ache from the cold. Pa! Pa! Clapping his hands, Blood Flag revealed a faint smile as he walked out from the blood vortex. Although his eyes were full of praise, there was a trace of disappointment on his face. He never thought that these two prey would be able to escape his trap. Dark Ruler. Beneath the black robes, Chinyu lightly said, "There is no past grievance or grudge between us, so why must you come to kill me?" Blood Flag shook his head. "It must not have been easy for you to reach your current cultivation. After experiencing so many storms, why ask such a stupid question?" His eyes brightened, and he exuded a shocking deterrent. "In this world, why do you need so many reasons? I want to kill you, so I came." The black-robed figure fell silent. Chinyu frowned and sighed inwardly. Thinking about it from another perspective, if he were the one in the imperial capital who had the qualifications to compete for the throne, he would also firmly grasp the chance to eliminate Li Yizhou. So from the start, Chinyu was well aware that this person in front of him would kill him. The reason he spoke such nonsense was to judge his opponent's strength and prepare a response ahead of time. Unfortunately, the result wasn't too wonderful. The blood flag in front of him wasn't a ruler. Chinyu was certain of this. At his current level, he could faintly feel the impregnable shackles above his head. This was the gate leading to the ruler realm. The shackles above Blood Flag's head had become much thinner, and it seemed he would soon be able to break through them. But he was still restricted within. If it wasn't a ruler, then with Chinyu's current strength, he didn't need to fear it, but he felt an intense threat from Blood Flag. It was bloody and fatal. There were two possibilities for this. One was that Blood Flag had some extremely formidable trump card in his hands. Once he used it, he could instantly release a devastating strength. The second was that Blood Flag had other methods that could temporarily increase his strength and erupt with the might of a ruler. Chinyu was more inclined towards the second possibility. If he only had a single trump card, how could Blood Flag dare to be so arrogant? The only possible explanation was that he could use it repeatedly. Only this could explain why he had the confidence to dare to kill people in the capital regions. But even so, did Blood Flag not care about the Imperial Capital's investigation? After all, from True Saint Bayou's expression, he could tell that stopping a border army soldier from killing people in the capital regions was clearly an extremely vile matter. He isn't afraid of being investigated. True Saint Bayou's voice sounded out in Chinyu's ears. Blood Flag's background is a bit complicated. In short, you can understand it as the Imperial military tolerates him, and this tolerance extends to the Imperial Palace. If we die today, we can only die in vain. So do you understand? We cannot die like this. Chinyu's eyebrows shot up. Even in this situation, Blood Flag still wasn't prepared to escape by himself. Even if he wanted to befriend Blood Flag, he had never heard of anyone willing to gamble with their own life. The corners of True Saint Bayou's mouth twitched as if he had sensed the shock in the black-robed man's eyes. He gritted his teeth and growled, "If I could escape alone, I would have done so without hesitation. However, it's too late now. The Blood Flag has locked onto us and sees us as its prey today. The Blood Flag has never let its prey go." Rumble, rumble, rumble. Behind them, loud explosions rang out from the intense battle, causing the earth to tremble slightly. Jiang Qingzi's opponent was Blood Flag, and Qin Yu and True Saint Baiyu were also facing Blood Flag. Their auras were exactly the same, and the feeling of threat and terror they gave off was also exactly the same. Qin Yu exclaimed in his heart. The desolate region was truly extraordinary. This was the first time he had seen such methods in his life. As for what True Saint Baiyu said, he didn't think too much about it. This wasn't because he had enough confidence in himself to deal with the Blood Flag's attack, but because when he sensed the blood vortex hidden in the nothingness from the very start, he was able to confirm the icy cold and cruel killing intent in the Blood Flag's heart. Blood Flag was strong. In fact, it was likely that he was even stronger than the ruler that had appeared at the Heavenspan Sword sect. But waiting for death wasn't Qin Yu's style. Since he didn't want to wait for death, he could only fight with his life on the line. The only thing that left him a bit relieved was that in his current state, Qin Yu had obtained the support of the Dark Emperor crown, as well as the Eye of Darkness. His strength had risen dramatically. It was also because of this that even though he was frowning beneath his black robes, his eyes were still calm. Blood Flag could feel this calmness. The appreciation on his face deepened, but his eyes became even colder. They were like sharp and hard ice blades that wanted to pierce through Qin Yu and nail him to the ground. I originally thought that fighting with Jiang Qingzi would be my only harvest today, but I never imagined there would be such a pleasant surprise. This is good. Bang! The blood-red vortex suddenly exploded. Its speed rapidly rose, and a terrifying swallowing strength erupted from within. Qin Yu grabbed True Saint Baiyu and tossed him away. If this fellow died here, then even if the one who killed him was Blood Flag, he would still be in deep trouble. After all, today's attack was all because of him. Protecting True Saint Baiyu was the same as selling him and the influence behind him a favor. To Qin Yu, who was like duckweed floating on water in the boundless western wilderness, there might be some unexpected harvests. Of course, the premise of all of this was that he could smoothly survive today. If he was killed here, whether or not True Saint Baiyu lived or died wouldn't matter at all. True Saint Baiyu stumbled to the ground, a look of shame on his face. It had to be known that just now he had thought about the possibility of escaping by himself. Hesitation flashed in his eyes. He took a deep breath and loudly said, "You must be careful. Blood Flag's most powerful technique is that he can control a person's mind." Beneath the black robes, Qin Yu's eyes flashed. He took a step forwards. With a loud bang, the earth shattered and his feet sank into the ground up to his ankles. His black robes were pulled up by the swallowing strength, stretching as if they were cast from iron. He pointed straight in the direction of the blood-red vortex. With loud cracking sounds, cracks appeared beneath his feet. He couldn't stop it. Even if he continued to waste time, he would only lose more strength. In the end, he wouldn't be able to escape the fate of being swallowed up by the blood-red vortex. As Qin Yu reached this conclusion, a bit of hesitation flashed in his eyes. But as he took a deep breath, it turned into determination. Bang! With a loud explosion, he took another step forwards. But this time, he didn't want to resist the swallowing strength of the blood-red vortex. Rather, the moment he stepped forwards, he borrowed the strength of the shaking ground to rush forwards. His speed was so fast that he left behind afterimages as he submerged into the blood-red vortex. With his own strength, combined with the terrifying swallowing strength of the blood-red vortex, his speed reached an unimaginable level. Qin Yu was like a boulder tumbling down from the summit of a mountain. The explosive impact caused the blood-red vortex to instantly distort and deform. Blood Flag paled. Interesting, but it is impossible for you to injure me with just a moment of courage. The only result for you is your own destruction. Rumble, rumble. After the blood-red vortex swallowed Qin Yu, it spun even faster, and the aura it emitted became increasingly wild. It was like a meat grinder running at full speed, enough to instantly tear apart an entire mountain. But at this time, a deep look of concentration appeared on Blood Flag's face, as if he had sensed something. In the next moment, a bit of darkness appeared deep within the blood-red vortex. Then, Like a drop of ink falling into clear water, it began to spread outwards at an astonishing speed. In a breath of time, the darkness occupied the core region of the blood-red vortex. But after it passed this boundary, the speed at which it spread slowed down, as if it was being suppressed by a powerful strength. True Saint Bayou, who had escaped from the battlefield, relaxed as he saw this. What he was most worried about was that Qin Yu would be directly killed. If this really happened, then regardless of what problems Blood Flag would encounter afterwards, he himself would be in deep trouble. Without any hesitation, True Saint Bayou turned and left, rushing back to the imperial capital at an astonishing speed. Intercepting someone in the capital region was already a great taboo. If it was anyone else today, they wouldn't necessarily dare to stop a border army team. Only a madman like Blood Flag would dare to ignore this. And once they entered the imperial capital, even Blood Flag wouldn't dare to casually attack them. This was because even a madman didn't want to die. And within the imperial capital, recklessly sending out experts to intercept someone would provoke the sensitive nerves of the imperial palace. Whether it was to protect the dignity of the imperial palace or to make an example of someone to warn the future generations, they would never tolerate this. This point had already been amply proven in the past. Thus, True Saint Bayou was very clear that the assassination in the capital region was the bottom line. As long as he could return to the imperial capital, no one would dare to attack him again. Suddenly, True Saint Bayou's expression changed drastically. He maintained his high-speed escape mode and didn't try to dodge. That was because he knew that his aura had been completely locked on, and there was no way for him to escape. With a low roar, a jade ornament that True Saint Bayou was wearing shattered with a paw. Boundless power rose up and gathered behind him, forming a powerful defense. In the next instant, a blood-colored palm suddenly appeared, and without any hesitation, it slammed heavily towards True Saint Bayou. With a loud sound, his entire body was blasted down and smashed heavily onto the ground. Mud and stones flew everywhere, forming a terrifying trench in the ground. However, in the next instant, there was a whistling sound as True Saint Bayou, who was vomiting mouthfuls of blood, flew out again and continued to rush towards the imperial capital. His eyes were filled with shock, anger, and fear. His respect for Blood Flag instantly increased by a few levels. Just a casual slap from the Blood Flag had such power. If he hadn't sensed that the situation was bad and used his life-saving treasure, he would have already been turned into a pile of broken bones. Blood Flag's strength was even greater than the rumors said. Darkness Ruler, this is all I can do for you. Whether or not you can survive will depend on yourself. Boom! A blue gust of wind suddenly appeared, directly wrapping around True Saint Bayou. His speed suddenly rose, and he disappeared from sight. Blood Flag glanced at the black vortex that was spreading outwards. He frowned and suppressed the killing intent in his heart. Although the fact that a prey had escaped, and it was an imperial bloodline that he was very interested in, as long as he killed the Darkness Ruler, he would be satisfied today. Killing people in the capital region had always been a great taboo, so Blood Flag was well aware of this. If there were no accidents, someone would soon arrive, so he didn't have much time left. Unfortunately, if this were a different situation, he would have been able to play around with this Darkness Ruler. The Darkness Ruler controlled was quite extraordinary. Blood Flag's lips curved in a smile. With a thought, he released his suppression. The darkness in the depths of the blood-colored vortex spread out like a prisoner that had been freed, instantly turning it pitch black. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.